look, until they're look, if they're white belts, atheists, I will disconnect them away, and if there are serious contenders, we let Jimmy at them.
Now consider a man who wants to debate with the empiricist at this point. And he brings an argument, we'll call it argument A, to bear on the empiricist. And another man comes into the room and he uses argument B with the empiricist. Now, if argument A is in fact predicated on an ultimate presupposition which denies that sense perception is the standard of truth, and the empiricist buys argument A, would you please notice that he can only buy that argument by rejecting his presupposition? That is, he can't buy that argument and keep his presupposition, because this is predicated on the denial of that as the ultimate standard of truth. On the other hand, if somebody arguing on the basis of sense perception being the standard of truth goes along as his argument, and the empiricist buys it, he buys it because he's already committed to sense perception as being the standard of truth. Now, nobody's talking about what has been referred to by R.C. as the elementary logical fallacy of circular reasoning. Nobody says A is true because A is true. We're talking about transcendental thinking, and that's a very important area of epistemology. It goes far beyond elementary Greek logic, far beyond Humean empiricism, and in fact, if anything, it has its roots in what is really the continental tradition of Kant of asking about the preconditions of all knowledge, be it logic or sense perception or whatever. And what the presuppositionalist says is you must recognize that an ultimate standard is just that, ultimate. And if you have an argument for that ultimate standard that is other than the ultimate standard, then that other argument is your ultimate standard. You understand that you can't establish your ultimate point by going behind it, because if you could go behind it to find some grounds for it there, that would be your ultimate standard. And so then the question is, well, how do you argue for this? And the fact is, the only way you can argue is in a way consistent with your presuppositions. And the only way you can establish your presuppositions is transcendentally. And that is circular argumentation. It has nothing to do with the flatline circularity of begging the question. And then finally, the objective criterion evidence of the presuppositionalist is precisely the revelation of God, which gets through. I agree with R.C. It gets through to every man. And I want to maintain it gets through to every man, whether he's been to college or not, whether he has a junior high diploma or not, whether he knows anything about Aristotelian logic or symbolic logic, or knows anything about Hume or any philosopher. I don't care if it's Sophie the washwoman. She knows God, and Paul says is without excuse for her rejection. And I must have a method of argumentation which meets those facts. Not simply immediate, natural theology, but an argument based upon the clear, perspicuous, and certain revelation of God that comes through to everybody through nature.
Would you repeat that last? I didn't hear whether you said immediate or immediate.
The knowledge which all men have is immediate. What is apologetics? Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:20, where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world, or of this age? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? In one phrase, I think that's the battle cry of presuppositional apologetics. Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this age?
Now, yeah, basically the conversation we're having though is Jay wants to say that that there's just non-inferential justification, but it seems like all he's really providing is examples like acquaintance knowledge and stuff. But I just want to say that I don't mind. So I don't mind it satisfying the condition of knowledge or satisfying the condition of like being a belief or something, which I haven't really read enough into in terms of like how or what like non-propositional beliefs. I don't know a lot of stuff about that, but I'm happy to grant that. But I don't understand the justification part. Like to say like acquaintance is justified non-propositionally. I don't know what that means. Or like non-inferentially, sorry, I should say. I don't know what that means.
Well, I guess, look, let me explain my confusion. My situation is that when you say that confuses you, that's mysterious to you, or you don't know what that means, I'm over here and I've got a bunch of apples, and you're talking about these red apples, and you say, but I don't really know what a green apple would be like. I'm like, yeah, but that's a little confusing to me because from my perspective, I don't know what could be confusing about seeing a red apple and then not being able to imagine that one could be green. Like, what is it about red apples that they need to be red? You know, what is it about apples that they you can only have them in one? So my issue is like, what do you think is going on with justification that ties inference in it so intimately, the way you seem to be thinking it does?
Yeah, so like I said, I was open because this is what like Nick was asking me yesterday, saying like, do you think it's like a contradiction, just like denying inferential justification? I was like, maybe it's like derivable, but on the face of it, no. I think like justification could speak to a whole host of things, like even let's say like it could just speak to like psychology or something. So I think like like for instance, if somebody says something like there was no inference, but X, not J, but like X individual, Y individual feels justified. That seems pretty coherent. But what do we mean there? Do we just mean they have some feeling or some sensation of justification that you're tokenizing as justification? If not, if you mean something else, then I'm just saying I don't know what we mean. That's so. I would just love it to be articulated from you guys' view. Nick, you know, may Jesus and the Lord bless him, did a terrible job yesterday of explaining it to me. So I'm just that's what I'm interested. I'm joking, but he tried, but maybe it was a deficiency on my part. But I just didn't understand.
Super quick, right? We could just say that's a basic belief, or whether it's like a mental content or it's a sensation. We can just say, well, that's a basic belief, and in the absence of a defeater, we can call that justified,
Oh yeah, so is that what you
right?
mean? Are you just like appealing to PC? Because they could have said that ages ago.
Oh, okay, I think so. I think that's what they would say. I'm not sure. Ask
No,
John.
No,
Nick,
no, I don't think so.
Why not?
No, because that's like well,
because that seems to be somewhat. By the way, sorry, just a, it seems like an argument could be made that they're somewhat inferential, right? Like at least to say the framework is an inference in itself. You're just saying like, if no defeaters, then justified. No defeaters, therefore justified.
Oh no, I was talking about basic beliefs that are not inferred by other beliefs. Like just a sensation, for example, like I don't know, looking at a tree or whatever, or I don't know. I guess there are many examples you can give. It doesn't have to be like a sensation, right? But so just a basic belief, right? What is the issue there? Because I don't think there's any inference needed.
well. So my
Well, but
issue
it, so
would
oh,
be
sorry. Can I say one thing on that though quickly? That sounds like similar to like some like one might use one might substitute the term for foundational, right? But what the question would still remain. Then I'll just it seems it kicks the can a step down the road. Why would that be justified? It's just because it's basic.
Okay.
And then if that's the case, we
Now we are already
yeah.
at the problem of criterion. So go ahead, Jimmy.
well. So yeah, I think the problem with the basicality approach is that that's coming from a foundationalist view of knowledge, and I don't want to adhere to foundationalism. So I'm going to avoid that. But I still want to kind of push this back on like what we think justification is. So um, if somebody asks me like somebody could ask the opposite question you're asking, Timothy. Somebody could ask, why do you think inferences justify beliefs? Why are any inferences considered justification? And then you could get as in depth as you want. You can tell a very short story, you can tell a very long story, but the gist of your story is going to be something about how inferences support beliefs or they warrant beliefs, they raise the probability of their being true or something like that. Like you're going to tell a story about how there's some kind of function that the inference plays to make your belief uh, warranted or epistemically positive or whatever terms you want to use. And so if you tell that story and you're able to then say this is why we thought inferences should be considered justifications in the first place, that's the very kind of story that opens up the gates to non-inferential justification, because by telling that story, you've demonstrated that there's nothing about an inference on the face of it that can't just be questioned the same way. You could ask questions about non-inferential alternatives. So if I can ask the same question about both, like what is a justification at all, then I see no mystery left there about like what a non-inferential justification would be. A non-inferential justification is going to be the same thing that an inference is when it's a justification.
Yeah, I'm still like confused, right? Because it seems like the question. So it seems like the question. So I've got a couple of thoughts. First thought is, I mean, I could throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then you still have to answer the question for me. Because I could say, yeah, I agree with you. You can't have inferential justification either, and then you'd have to make the case for non-inferential justification. But assume I grant inferential justification, which I do, then it seems like somebody could. It seems like what's going to happen there then is somebody could collapse justification into inference by just saying, yeah, the conclusion of an argument following this system that it's like entailed has some kind of inference, or there's some kind of like relation between premises and conclusion that necessitate the conclusions. Whatever definition they want to give you for an inference, so like that is what it means to be justified. If that was what they said, then you'd still be left with a question. So they would give you their account, right, of inferential justification. You'd still be left with um, what you mean by justification, and then what you mean by the thing that the thing that is justifying something without any kind of similar relation or connection. So just like an object or a fact or something, how is it? What work is it doing to service the justification without an inference? How do we get from there to there?
Okay, I'm not sure I understood the last part there. So the parts I followed you, I thought I was following you, right, was when you said that that some people might just bite the bullet and be skeptics and say, yeah, I don't think inferences are justifications either. To that person, I'm just going to ask them what they think it is. Maybe they think there's no such thing as justification. Okay, well, we can talk about that. But I don't think that's where you're coming from. I'm just trying to figure out where you are coming from. So the second alternative you gave was that you could say you think that, and this is my reconstruction of what you're saying. So if you think this is unfaithful, just jump in and say, no, that's not what I meant. But the alternative that you gave was something like they might believe just that all justifications are a subset of inferences. That in fact, justifications just are, that is, are reducible to some set of inferences, maybe just to inference itself, so that whenever you're making an inference, that just is to have, that just constitutes a justification. The problem with that is just going to be that belief itself is not the result of any such inference. There is no forthcoming inference to that conclusion, and so that's not a justified belief, and so it can just be dismissed out of hand, based on the very criterion that thesis sets forth. So,
Yeah, but how is your dismissal justified?
well, my dismissal is not a belief, right? That's just a way of saying I I have no reason to treat what you're saying as true yet, because what you're saying is that reasons to treat something as true are on the basis of true beliefs, which we individuate, which we're able to account or access them as being true, or whatever you want to say. We're able to acquire them as knowledge and not just accidentally true beliefs in virtue of arguments. But there's no argument for that claim.
There's no argument for what like a metalogical argument, isn't it?
No, the claim, I'll put it this way, right? The claim that all justifications constitute arguments is a claim for which there is no argument.
Well, I mean, the question here is it definitional? Is contained within the definition of justification an inference, or like our inferences constitutive of justifications, and that's what's under examination. So I guess that's your response, but my request would be, do you have a counterexample that's like equally as intuitive to me as it is to you? Because that's initially what I was asking for. I wasn't really challenging. I'm not presenting the case as like uh, inferences are a necessary condition for justification. I was saying it seems to me, upon at a cursory glance, it seems to be the case, but you could probably correct me with like a counterexample or some kind of intuition part. So like, do you
I
have one?
could, yeah, I could. I think I could give an example. I don't know if it'll fit your. I don't know all of what is going on in the word intuitive. That's a. There's nothing wrong with using that word. I'm not faulting you for using that word, but when you do, it's one of those things where it's like, well, I'm kind of shooting in the dark here. I'll get to that example in a second, but I just want to note that um, what you're saying about your own caution, like you're examining this issue, is why I started out by saying what I did. That like, well, hey, look, put yourself in my shoes for a second. You're asking me for an example of non-inferential justification, and to me, that's like asking for
For
an
an
apple that,
inference? Oh,
yeah, yeah.
sorry.
Well, and to me, that's like asking for an apple that's not red. I'm like, well, wait a second. Before we even give an example of like a green or yellow apple, we can just say, what was it about the redness that made you think the apple needed it? There should be some story that you can give that
Yeah,
you
but
can't
would
have distinctly.
can I ask you a question? Yeah, like, okay, take the like, because obviously people have different sort of concepts of justification. So take the probability raising concept, right?
Okay.
Say again.
Oh, I was saying, yeah, sure, I follow.
Oh yeah, okay, cool. Like, wouldn't you say that's like inherently inferential?
No,
Why not?
well, I see no reason why it should be.
It's going to
Well,
be
I
like,
mean,
at a minimum, it's going to be inductive, though, right?
no, it just means that there has to be some. I'm in being intentionally vague here, right? Because there's 1,001 different ways that philosophers want to try to put this together, right? Like whether it's truth tracking or whatever, but there has to be some fact of the matter that my belief is probably true, right? That it fits some kind of criterion of probability.
Yeah, but wouldn't you have to hold to some kind of theory of probability?
It depends on, do I have to believe in a specific philosophical construct about probability? No, I don't think so. You just you would have to hold it in the sense that I have to behave as if it's true. Like um, I would have to think in a way that suggests my motivations are in accord with that theory.
But then, even if you think about it, like for instance, you come. I'm like working through this in my mind, by the way, so this might be incoherent, but isn't it like just dialectical to favor one hypothesis over the other, though? Like when you think about it, like what are you saying if you say like I favor? Because it seems like a conclusion's been reached there, right? Whether it's credence, whatever, like it just seems like to be able to engage in any kind of probabilistic. Well, I was about to beg the question there. Probably I was about to say probabilistic reasoning, but like to engage in any, to engage in any kind of um. Sorry, someone wanted to say there, and I was about to dawdle. So if anyone wants to interrupt, you can. No? Okay, cool. Yeah, it just seems like you're coming to some kind of conclusion, and that seems to imply inference, doesn't it? What does it mean to say? What does it mean to say X is more probable than Y? That seems somewhat dialectical, doesn't it?
I don't think that it's necessary. Oh, so I think we're confusing belief. I think we're confusing like a second order belief about the belief in question, right? So if I believe that an apple is red, and like the apple in front of me is red, um, what the justification for that belief is going to be some state of affairs that makes that belief probable, and which has some kind of important relation to my belief formation, right? The way I acquired that belief is somehow relevant to the facts that make it likely. however that is. I really don't care. There's very many different ways to try to model how exactly the relationship is, but it doesn't matter to me. But then you're asking the question about suppose that I have a belief that that belief in the apple's redness is probable. Then that too would need like another state of affairs that make that second order belief probable, and which belief was formed in a certain way, blah 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 blah. But those aren't the two same beliefs. This is somewhat this seems to be kind of running maybe into like a KK question of like whether you always need to know the
Is it me or
justification.
is he cutting out for everyone else as well?
No, I can hear him just fine.
Okay, it's just me.
Well, dang. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, he's the one that's got. It sounds like maybe his internet is not working. Freaking Himothy.
By the way, Arrhenius, what was his name? Darth Arrhenius Darth. I was the one in your
Can you hear me?
YouTube comment
Yeah,
section saying,
Uranius.
"Oh, he's back." Oh yeah. Go at Himothy.
I missed a lot of that. I thought it was you cutting out Jimmy, and I realized it was me. I'm sorry if you don't mind repeating it, or if not, we can like move on.
Yeah. So what I was trying to say is that what I was saying is that I think we're moving into like the KK issue. So you're right that. So I think the inference being made is that right now I'm doing some reasoning about the nature of knowledge, but that's not the same thing as the example I'm using of like somebody knowing that an apple is red. That person surely doesn't need all this conversation we're having right here. That surely is a little bit dialectic in the sense that like I'm responding to points you're making. None of that is going on in the mind of the person who acquires this knowledge that the apple is red. And the person, from my point of view, the person who acquires the knowledge that the apple is red, he doesn't need to know. He doesn't need the second order belief about the justification he has for that apple, and he doesn't need that to be known. Right? I mean, surely it follows that if he doesn't have to believe it, he doesn't have to know it.
Okay, but well, I'm not sure. Like, because I don't know if I don't think this was meant to be like a formal debate. Darth can weigh in if he feels as well. So maybe like I'm asking a question to the whole room, but it just seems like it seems like probability in this context at least is like kind of relative. So you'd be saying something like X is like more probable than Y, or X is probable, or like you're more likely to favor X given some credence you have in X. But then all of that seems somewhat dialectical, or at least it seems like you're coming to some conclusion about X. And I want to say on that theory, I think that so I'm going to be more inclined to believe that theory of justification is going to be is going to necessitate some inference. And I would be interested to know on that theory of justification how you justify some proposition non-inferentially. That would be like that. If you're going to pick, if out of the examples I would choose, that would be the most interesting one. And if anyone else wants to weigh in, I'm interested to know. Maybe I'm just not seeing something.
Okay, can you restate what the theory is again?
Like that justification means just increases is like probability raising or something, or increases the probability in the veracity of X over Y or something.
It just seems that it's really easy to
What are
give.
you taking the epistemic standard to be when you say X is more probable than Y? Like truth conduciveness?
Um,
My belief in X is more truth conducive than Y. Therefore,
yeah,
I'm
something like that.
justified. Yeah, so then you could say if the standard is truth conduciveness, then given the fact that X is more probable than Y, I'm like justified in believing X, all things considered, rather than Y, something like that. Like,
That seems to be what that's it, because I think Jimmy wants to say that would be some kind of like second order inference, I believe. But I'm just saying, just the process itself. What is contained within the process? As in, wouldn't you say that your belief, your that maybe that is second order. Well, yeah, I have to say your belief that X is more truth conducive or something, or it is the case that X is. It's more probable that X is the case as opposed to Y or something. That seems to be like a conclusion. Like that's what I don't know. Maybe there's like something I'm not understanding.
What's confusing me is that, so say you take that account, right? So you take that, you're taking the truth conduciveness account of your epistemic norms, and you're taking justification just to be that there's some kind of, maybe you would say it like that given you had enough knowledge, you could come up with some formalism about how the belief is more probably true than false given the relevant factors. Okay, but that's not to say that you actually build that formalism to acquire the true justified belief. It's not to say that you reach that belief because you had all this reasoning about the factors and all this stuff. It's just to say that if you did, it would all work out. Right? It's to say that if you do go back and try to defend it and have all this analysis, then it can be defended in this way. But it's not
Yeah,
to say
I agree with that, but are you? But what I'm saying is there's still going to be reasoning, right? You're still going to need to perform reasoning to conclude. Like just to say there's a conclusion doesn't mean doesn't presuppose some strict formal reasoning. It just presupposes reasoning. It's just saying like I've come to this conclusion. There definitely some inference was made, doesn't it? Is that not the?
oh, we're going to get into we're going to get into like the question of like psychologically what is an inference.
But that's what I was gonna say. Like I was gonna grant you some psychological justification, and that's why I was gonna say, yeah, I'm not saying it's analytic or something like justification means inference, but because it seems like you could be saying a lot of things. But let's say we just like focus on this theory for a moment and say this like probability raising as a definition. Seems that's kind of inferential. I think the easiest way to do this, because I'm not, you know, I'm not that technically sound when it comes to philosophy. So maybe an example would serve as some kind of intuition pump here. Oh, you said not intuition, but maybe an example would help me, would help bridge the gap.
Well, if you mean by inference something other than reasoning that is some variety or minimally a summation of something that can be formally articulated, like in a syllogism or something, then I think the terms may be being used too loosely. Because when I think of inference, I'm thinking of what like scholastics called dianoetical reasoning, which is the idea that you have different propositions. They're in your conscious mind. They form some kind of content in the mind, and you, to speak of them sort of metaphorically, you're sort of chaining them together in a very specific way so that a set of these propositions supports another proposition, or multiple of these propositions support multiple. There's some kind of relation here, some kind of structure between the propositions as they're put in their mind, where their content of the mind and the content of the propositions are entailing something. They're entailing some other proposition or entailing each other, whatever it is. But if that's not what you mean by an inference, so for example, suppose I open up this door and someone is passing by, and it's it's in the instant I open up the door. I don't know they're coming. I don't know anything about it. I'm not doing any reasoning about propositions there. I'm just instantaneously acquainted with the percept of a person walking by me, and that's really all there is to it. And it's the fact. So from my point of view, it's the fact that we have access to the fact God has designed our mental faculties to be reliable, that gives the undergirding story about why that's worthy of calling knowledge, why percepts like that have some kind of innocent until proven guilty status. But that has nothing to do with me like putting together some kind of abstract relations of propositions in any way that can be put into a formal syllogism. And
Yeah. So
if you want to call
you
that
saying?
inference,
Yeah. Sorry.
or just it might just be a semantic issue. Like if you want to call that inference, I'm not here to like complain about how you're using the word. It just means
Yeah.
like
Like, but is it fair to say that in retrospect it could be formalized? So let's say you just got like a reason for believing in something, and you like appeal to it, and then I'm like, yeah, but why? Like, why would that serve as a justifier? And is it okay? So is it fair to say this, that all non-inferential justifiers, um, sorry, is it fair to say this, that it is possible to make an inference out of some non-inferential justifier? That's like poorly phrased, but I think you get the idea.
I, so what I think you might be saying, because I do agree with it, is that you can expect in principle that you can inferentially defend non-inferential justifications, even though the inferential
Okay.
justification that you have for claiming that this, that, or the other is a case of non-inferential justification is not itself identical to. It's quite distinct from that non-inferential
Okay.
justification.
That made it a bit more grey. But let me see if I can find it. So this is what I think I'm confused about. There exists some non-inferential justification, um, such that it would be impossible to justify inferentially. That's what I don't understand. Does that make sense? Am I still audible?
Uh, yeah, I'm having a hard time reconstructing that. So to me, like the takeaway is that, like, let's use a metaphor, right? Think of reasoning as like talking, right? And what I'm saying is, you and I can meet each other even though we're not talking. Okay, but we can talk about meeting each other. We can meet and not talk, or we can meet and talk. But I don't have to talk to meet you, right? And that's what I'm saying about beliefs here. I'm saying, look, you can have justification for belief, and you can reason about that justification for the belief. But reasoning about that justification and having that justification are two different things. And that justification might be reasoning. I
But I
actually
want to
haven't.
say something, and this might be a little bit more, topical,
Well,
given some, okay, given the major sporting event that's taking place currently, right? I want to say that what it seems like the distinction that was made, which I kind of agree with, is like we could play football in the street, and we could play football in a pitch with a referee. And the question I asked you was, and I want to say, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So it could be the case that you're just playing street football. There is no referee. Maybe you're playing in the favelas. You're not wearing any shoes or socks. But I want to say, in principle, there could be a referee to govern the game in the favela. Because if it's impossible, if you want to say it's like impossible to referee whatever it is that you think you're playing in the favelas, then I want to say then you're not playing football at all. That's not what you're doing. On my view, this is what's like confusing me. So I'm not sure how I would integrate that into the talking example, but that's the point I'm trying to make. So there exists some non-inferential justification such that it's impossible to justify inferentially. That's what I disagree with. I don't think that's what
Okay,
I'm like.
okay. So the best I can like restate what I think you're saying, and that analogy was very useful. If it did get me to understand what you're saying now, it sounds like you want to say that um, inferential the nature of inference is that it plays sort of a archetypal role, that it is a criterion of justification, such that whenever um, whenever you have non-inferential justification, it still has this kind of indirect rule following with respect to rules of inference. Because even though it's not an inference, and so it doesn't abide straightforwardly to those rules,
I want to
when you're,
say, sorry, can I just interject? Compatibility would like seem like a word that will service the elucidation. So I want to say it's like compatible. This like non-inferential justification would be compatible with any inferential um, theory of justification. You could integrate it seamlessly.
yeah, it seems
That's what
like
I
it
want
would
to
be
say.
very. I don't know about integrate seamlessly, but the part about saying they're compatible, I think it'd be very weird if somebody said they were incompatible. Now, you could do that, but it would just, I think it would lead to simple
Yeah,
problems.
that's what. So I agree. So if that's all that's being said, like both examples, I think kind of made that point. Then yeah, if you're just saying like by non-inferential, you just don't believe there's like some formalized process. Like you could construct one, you could reconfigure it, but it's not the case that that's the product of some formal process. Then I probably agree with you. I'd say probably a lot of the things I hold to be justified are not like inferential in that way. I'd agree. But one problem it would raise, just to be clear, in terms of the context of how this arose, is that but that's what's being asked of not necessarily you, but in most cases the presuppositionist or whoever's like proffering this kind of like or like this kind of obstacle, right? Is to say, okay, well then you can still justify it inferentially. So I don't give it. Sorry, I don't care about you know the particularities of the process which led you to justify this thing or lack thereof. Now I want to hear. Now I want you to adapt it to this inferential model, so you can justify it in a way in which, like would convince me or something. Because if they bite that bullet, then they're gonna have to say, okay, it's compatible, it's possible. Then give me the inference.
Yeah, but so there's like three different things I think they're getting mixed up there. One is compatibility, right? So we agree that the kind of story I gave about seeing a guy walk past my door a bit ago, that kind of perceptual story of knowledge, that's not an inference that I'm making, but it's still a case of knowledge acquisition. Okay. Um, then there are cases of reasoning, and what we want to say is the rules that tell you what constitutes a good way to arrive at perceptual knowledge versus perceptual goings on that don't count as knowledge acquisition, and the rules that distinguish valid and sound inferences or whatever, and those and so distinguish them from inferences that are invalid, fallacious, whatever. Those rules work together. They're part of a system. They're compatible. That part we're both on the same page. But I think then you're moving to say, therefore, whenever you have a case of something like this perception that you're talking about, Jimmy, you can substitute the perceptual story that you gave for something like a formal syllogism and arrive at the same belief. And I'm going to say no. Like there's no way for me to um, justify these beliefs without some kind of appeal to uh, this story about acquiring them perceptually, because that's just the very nature of how the beliefs are acquired, right? Like on my view, um, the nature of arguments is to either acquire, from a psychological standpoint, right? The nature of arguments is mostly to defend things that we already know in such a way that it's persuasive to somebody else who hasn't thought of it yet. And there is a very, very, very small role for arguments to play in figuring out things that are very abstractly true or false. like say in mathematics or something, right? Okay,
But
there you can use arguments to actually discover things that you didn't know before. But
but you
it's
see,
pretty.
oh sorry,
I'm
sorry,
just
sorry, go
using
on.
I'm just using it to distinguish our two views, right? Because uh, from that perspective, right, it's just very weird. It's I'm not seeing how it would be supported by the fact that the rules about perception and the rules about inference are part of one system, and so they're compatible. I'm not sure how it would follow from that or be supported by that or whatever.
But isn't
That
that just to say they're not compatible though?
no, to say that they're not replaceable is not to say that they're not compatible.
Hmm. But
Like the
if
sides of the square and the sides of the square and the corners of the square, the angles are compatible, but they're not replaceable. It's not like I can just take away the corners and just have sides.
then maybe compatibility was my mistake then, because that probably wasn't going to be a good. So so I think I want to make a stronger claim. Then I want to say like in principle, all because that's like what I wanted to say. I wanted to say like that existential statement I made about like, or was a kind of like a modal claim as well. I want to say that if you're saying that there exists some um, justification, that there exists some justification. What was it? How did I say it? Such that
I think you want to say if there's a non-inferential justification, then there
yeah.
is.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, right? So you're not saying that these are easily confused, and that's why I'm bringing back up this whole thing we've already kind of dismissed. But I think it's a useful foil to help um, cut off the edges and get exactly at what you're saying. I think. So on the one hand, you could say that all justifications are inferences, and there you've just said what you said, either that all justifications are a subset of inferences, or you've just constituted inferences as justifications. To have a justification is just the same thing as making an inference. One of those two things. You're not saying either of that. What you're saying, Timothy, is that for any non-inferential justification, there is an inferential justification, which uh, were you to be in, if were you to have the right tools, the right circumstances, whatever, you could use that to substitute for the non-inferential justification.
Right, and to say and what the only view I'm pushing back on is the only view I'm pushing back on is there exists some non-inferential justification such that if it were to be justified, such that an inf that it's impossible to inferentially justify or something. Forgive me for the syntax, but you get my point. So that like there could be some inference, that some non-inferential justification, or let's just say some justification, right, that exists that um, cannot be justified inferentially. Like it would be impossible for it to be justified inferentially. That's the view I have an issue with, and that's the example, the counterexample I'm asking you to provide, because I just don't know. I don't know what that would mean. Because it seems like the semantic dispute, I agree. Like, I think is like I agree that those kinds of those kind of justifications exist. I have no issue with that. But then to say now that it would be impossible to basically, if you like, upgrade one of those justifications to an inferential justification, to say that would be impossible, then I'm back to the state of confusion.
I guess I don't. Yeah, so that's kind of our thing, right? Is that I think part of this is that you think of inferences as better, and I don't. I just think of them as different. I think of them as
Sorry, Jimmy, don't interrupt. Don't read into upgrade. Like that was just a random choice of turn the phrase.
okay.
I just mean to say that like it's the case that it could be, it's possible for any
Yeah,
for all justifications, it is possible for them to be inferential justifications. That's all I meant.
yeah. I just it seems like there's for any kind of perception example that's not going to be true.
Yeah, but then our disagreement isn't semantic. Then it seems it's more substantive. Then
Of course, yeah.
yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
I'm saying. So what I'm saying is then there it has to conform. Then you know what? Maybe I'm saying that. Maybe I'm making a stronger claim that it's just all inferential. Then because then it would presumably, if it were the case that they were all compatible in the way I was thinking, so it means that like you could seamlessly integrate them, then it just seems what I'm saying there is that they themselves follow some kind of inference rule, just not ostensively. Like it's just you may not be cognizant of the particular rule you're following, but all of your justifications would be constricted in the same way a formal, syllogism would be.
Yeah, I just don't know. You'd have to give me like a practical way. Like, what are you going to do with something like Jimmy looks outside his room and he sees John Doe passing by, and acquires the belief reliably that John Doe is there passing by. How are we going to turn that
Yeah, but
into a
I'm not. I don't feel compelled to respond to that. Like I'm only responding to your claim of it being a justified belief. So you're going to make that. You're going to tell me how you acquired the belief, and I may agree or disagree, right? Depending on whatever story you tell. But then I'm going to ask you, and then you want to make the fight because that's the only reason this has come up is because people want to say it satisfies some condition for knowledge, namely the tripartite, some kind of tripartite epistemology. Okay, then people usually what happens is people go, oh, well, what's the justification for it? And then they appeal to this non-inferential status of justification. So it wouldn't be the case that you tell me you believe, like you could tell me you believe in God, or you could tell me you believe this, or you tell me, and you could tell me how you acquired it. Oh, I looked outside my window. But to say that's like justified, presumably over a non-justified belief, or unjustified belief, someone's going to ask you, yeah, why? And if
why
you,
is
and if, sorry, go on.
well, let's make that concrete, right? So, like it's just my view that God exists and has created the world, and he's made it in such a way that he expresses himself through the things that are made. So suppose I look out the window and I tell you, yeah, I mean, if you want to know that God exists, just look out your window. You'll see the sky. Or look at your hands. You'll see that you're made in His image. Or like look at any object. It's um, part of the it's part of the constitution of the things that are human experience that they're made by God. Right? What can you maybe clarify your question in terms of that? So it sounds like you're saying, well, why, in virtue of what, do those things justify my belief that they're made? Is what it sounds like you're saying. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, but if there's no like consequence, like some like entailment or whatever, then you are incapable of responding to the question of like in virtue of what. Like for instance, yesterday I was just I was using some silly examples about like, I'm justified in believing in X, and then somebody asks me why, and I just give them a non sequitur, like just appeal to something random. Like I'm justified in believing I'm the best fisherman in the world. Why? Um, because of basketball. It's like if I'm not positing any kind of logical relation there, then why would I be justified in believing I'm the best fisherman in the world? And if what you mean, it seems to me like the example you gave initially, when a justification is requested, if you just respond by restating the proposition or restating the belief you hold, why couldn't it be something? Why couldn't it be a disparate or an alternative proposition that has absolutely no connection to the initial proposition? Like, why can't you? If I could say, oh, I believe I saw somebody walking. I believe God is responsible for this, and someone said, what's the justification? I say, because I believe God is responsible for this. Why couldn't it equally be because I believe like sand is coarse? Because if you're not positing a connection between either of the statements, then why couldn't non-inferential justification just be a slew of non sequiturs?
So the only way I know how to yeah, I have I got like 10 things I want to do all at once, and I'm like, how do I make this short? First of all, I want to preface that like none of this is meant to be rude. So like even as I'm saying like I don't know what to start with, that's not to be like oh Timothy,
I'm
you're
already
just so
offended.
stupid.
I'm already
Yeah,
offended, Jay.
yeah, I know, right?
And
No, but I
you
think
should be, Timothy. Claiming to be a Jew.
Freaking
Claiming to be Jewish with that pale white face.
freaking all right. So there's that, right? So just don't take me as like being an asshat or anything. I'm trying to do this sincerely. But there's a couple things I think that are problematic here. One is that I can't help but think that there's a subtle question begging going on when you or not, maybe not technically question begging, but the question is loaded in that you're essentially asking how is that valid? You know, how is that you said how is it not a non sequitur? Well, that's to say how is it something that doesn't follow according to rules of inference?
I agree, by
Yeah,
the
but
way.
we're just talking about a non-inferential justification, right? So it doesn't have to follow the it. Sure, I think you're on to something, right? So this is why this is difficult because on the one hand, I think your question is loaded, but I don't want to just like sweep it away because I see the kernel of what I think you're onto, and that is like, well, there's got to be something, there's got to be some rule that you can point to that would differentiate um, why this account of the knowledge is good. And when somebody says, I know I'm the best fisherman because this basketball makes me know, that's a bad one. And you're rightfully asking, well, what is that? But what I'm going to say is one way to answer that question is to note how disanalogous a basketball is in comparison to the idea of a self-revealing God like the one in the Bible that I'm putting forward. Yeah, like a basketball isn't in control of the universe. Basketball isn't a person. Basketball has no intentions. It doesn't have designs. It has no memory. It has no knowledge. A basketball doesn't have the kind of interests that can be shared between persons or that can be articulated. A basketball is subject to a bunch of causal rules that can make it very limited as to people knowing anything about the basketball or having any kind of causal connections to the basketball. Um, as long as you're not looking at like the whole chain of the causal world itself, right? So there's just all these differences between who God is and what the basketball is, and I want to say, well, that's kind of playing to my favor because that sort of hints at the idea that like, it's really the uniqueness of this Christian God. It's really the uniqueness of the way he talks and the way he interacts with people and the things he does that differentiates himself from other things. And so just by looking at the source of the revelation, which is part of what's being revealed, right? The one who is doing the revealing is also the one who is being revealed, right? So by appealing to the source, which is just to appeal to the content, I can differentiate. I have the criterion by which to demarcate those sources of knowledge which could do what I'm saying the Christian God does, and those which don't, which is just nobody but the Christian God.
Yeah, check the
Um,
chat. I mean, that's what's being said. For there to be a reason for anything on the analytic account or a priori is to simply say that the predicate is contained within the concept.
well, this is so. I think I might butcher this. Sorry, because Brian just threw me off. But so I think the
Point
first thing.
scored.
Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm just
I'm
kidding.
not.
I'm
I'm not.
kidding.
Oh my God.
No, it's cool. I do agree that it's somewhat question begging. By the way, I just want to say, like, and I said this to Nick because it's like it's hard to. It seems like if I ask you for this to justify your theory of justification, it seems like at least that like is going to require an inference, and that kind of is consistent with what I posited as being the semantic dispute, or you posited as a semantic dispute we had. That it just seems like there is some compatibility there, and it, you know, it ought to be the case, that you can give inferentially, you can make inferences concerning, this non-inferential justification.
So this sounds like the problem the Methodist has in the problem of in the context of the problem of the criterion, where in terms of, in your words, it's like justification for the justification, but in that context, the criterion for the criterion, or
You need
how
to
do you
know
know it?
something. Yeah, I get you.
So then, yeah, the Methodist has a problem of regression, right? So again, I keep telling you guys, this problem keeps rearing its ugly head. The problem of the criterion. I think
But
you guys need to talk about that.
but we kind of are in a way by proxy. But I just wanted on the actual substance of what you said though. Sorry, that was a bit of a meta point I made just now. But on the substance of what you said, two things. One, I get if what you want to say is, it you agree with me to the point of God. So you just want to say something like you want to say something like for all justifications concerning the Christian God or something, then like um they can't be justified in terms of like making some inference. But it is the case for all other non-inferential justifications. You can like incorporate them into some kind, or you can integrate them, sorry, into some kind of formal inference or reasoning. If that's what you're saying, then at least I understand your point a little bit better. I may disagree, but I understand it. And probably, like, I probably would accuse you at some stage of special bleeding. But then, and the other one, it seems like you may have been appealing to like some kind of like some chain of like identity statements when like that was the distinction between the fish and the basketball and you know, the sun being evidence of God or something, or the sun justifying God's existence or your belief in the Christian God, because that in itself seems, if you would want to say like that serves as a justification, well, that seems to be like some kind of to rely on some kind of transitive inference, right? Like if contained in the definition of x is y, and if contained in the definition of y is x, then y serves as a justifier for x. But that seems to itself require some kind of inference, right? Which, yeah, kind of, so I think on one hand it's kind of like a bit of special pleading, but like maybe justifiable because you take God to be sui generis. On the other hand, it seems to be like also inferential if you're appealing to like the identities and stuff.
Well, what do you mean by inference? Because if we're just talking about an analysis, I don't
I mean,
understand
what do you
how
take
you would take
transitivity?
I think
What do you
he's
take
taking it as
transitivity?
some logical relation.
Yeah, like
sorry,
what do you take
what was
transitivity?
what was that, Arias?
He's just taking it as some logical relation. It's just not merely the fact that an agent is like acquiring P, given the fact that they experience P. It's also like some sort of entailment that follows from their experience of P, that believing in P is like truth conducive. But I think what Himothy is like trying to say is like something like justification, like what I take justification to be is just preserved by the fact that there are these like logical relations that stand with they like accord with my beliefs. And if that's the case, then you know, I'm like, I don't know, I'm justified into like holding this as like a criterion for knowledge. Is that your view, Timothy?
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. Is I mean, to be honest, yes, simple answer. And then also, but I am actually truly interested in like what is intended by like appeals to non-inferential justification. Like, what do you, what, how do you? Actually, you know, it'd be an interesting question. If you
You
might
could
go on.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, but just like it seems like I'm probably not going to get a good example other than an example that I don't believe satisfies any kind of justificatory conditions. So then, what do you believe is the problem that people are having, Jimmy? What do you like? Why do you believe the hill that people can't get over is? Because maybe then maybe you could still man my view, and then that would help me understand where I'm going wrong.
Well, I'm like, I'm like trying to put you and Brian and Arianis, and like you guys are saying different things, and so I'm trying to like, how do I interpret Himothy in a way that fits what Arianis is saying, or how do I interpret what Arianis is saying in a way that matches what Himothy is doing? So I'm still trying to figure it out
I don't
myself.
think you need inferences for that though.
uh,
Well, we to be honest, me and you have been going at it for quite some time. Pause. If you want, you can let you can speak to, um, Arianas, but whatever you do, don't speak to Brian.
Why don't you guys just come up with an agreement right now, a consensus on what you guys mean by inference, and then move from there? Because otherwise, you guys just talking past each other.
Yeah, I took inference to be like some kind of act of the mind in which well Arianus described it well, right? But it's not merely a logical relation. It's a logical relation that's accessed by a mind. So it's like some kind of somehow I've got mental
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the accessibility is like partially mental. It doesn't have to be like exhausted by the internal facts of the agent, but at least there's like a necessary condition for like for stuff like acquaintance and like what entailments are derived from the acquaintance that like the agent is. I mean, we want to argue that they're justified if they're like directly acquainted with P, right? Um, yeah, I mean, I take those some facts of those to be like internal, sure. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about. Are you guys specifically talking about a step in a reasoning progress, like the rules of inference and logic, or or is Timothy talking about the more generic, broad sense, like, oh, it's just where you can also name it justification or something like that?
But well, when the
I think we agree that justification, how we apply justification in the foreground is going to be dependent on like holding to classical logic in the background, right? You can't like possibly make statements about like what's justified or unjustified without like appealing to a logic in the background.
but the only reason I would attempt to steer clear from that is because that I feel like that will kind of trivialize things, and then I'll start like just appealing to all concepts he holds to, and then saying like it's the case that X is dependent on inference and Y, and then we can't target specifically justification. But
Hmm.
on
Yeah.
that point, I wanted, so I'm happy to dis, um I'm happy to discern or distinguish, I should say, some kind of psychological condition of justification from some kind of like epistemic justification. And I feel like we're discussing it sort of entirely in the epistemic domain here, because to say it's just like I would probably agree with you, like if somebody just like feels justified, and maybe it's like some inarticulable sensation or something they have, some psychological state, then okay, maybe that's, if that's what you mean by
Right.
non-inferential justification, okay, but I don't
That's
think
why
that's what
in
you're
the
saying.
beginning I thought you just meant a generic sense, like where an inference is the process of reasoning for what we think is true to what else is true, and that's why I talked about foundationalism or basic beliefs, all of that stuff. But then the topic moved towards more of a logical side or definition of
but
inference,
but if
like the
that
rules
was the
of
case,
inference.
sorry, go on,
Oh,
finish, sorry.
go ahead. Yeah, that was that. So
It's kind
Yeah,
of
if,
like
oh, sorry.
well to give a quick metaphor. So like so the logic thing in the background, right? So I think that's very useful. But the issue that I'm running into with you, Timothy, is um, the question is whether you think that just these logical relations need to hold, which is not, you're not going to find controversy in me over that. I think that's true. I think Arianus's question is good. Like, what would it mean for you to acquire reasons for your beliefs, or probabilities for your beliefs, or truth conduciveness for your beliefs, if these logical relations aren't holding in the background? Sure. But the question is, do you need to do certain mental acts that then access those logical relations and make them sort of represented in the mind or something in order to reach the belief in the first place? Does that need to play a part in um, being justified? If so, that's where the point of the departure is, right? Because uh, that is one way to think about earlier when I'm trying to remember the language that was used earlier. Compatibility, right? So, um, like on my view, um, the compatibility of these different means of justification is has to well, ultimately has to do with what God is doing, but like in a more proximate way, we can describe things more farther down in creation. in a more proximate way, what's going on there is these things kind of work together because they're all integrated in the human mind. They're part of one system of cognition, and so you can't have your perception working according to these rules over here, and then your inferences occurring to these rules over here, and never the two shall meet. They can't be like ships passing the night. There has to be some kind of unity between them if we're going to think about our perceptions and perceive things that we can then form thoughts about. So, but the issue is you don't need to say, I'm putting the claim out there. You don't need to say that you have to have access to um, those logical relations and reason about them in order to acquire knowledge about this kind of stuff. Right? There's a lot of things here that you can just acquire knowledge passively.
I want to say, sorry, we done.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was basically done.
Yeah, I was gonna say though. I just want to say, in principle, it's possible to access them. Though. That's. I think that's where we keep diverging. Like,
Yeah,
if it's not in principle possible, then it seems to be the case that
that's not. Yeah, that's no
there
disagreement.
is.
My brother, that is no disagreement.
So wait, so it's
Where
yeah, but then
we
if
might
there's,
disagree.
but then the problem that I raised initially still stands. Then if somebody appeals at, as if to some opacity, some non-inferential justification, I'm going to say then that's in conflict then with the established the established understanding we have now. Because what we agree now is, in principle, it is possible that you can make translucent or transparent this justification. So if you agree with that, then yeah, then we just completely agree. Now I understand what you mean. You just mean it's like not an appeal to some kind of formalized rationalization of some state of justification. But if you're saying no, actually no, it is impossible. In principle, it is impossible for some things to be justified via inference. Well, then I don't know what we mean again. I'm back to square one.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by in principle. Because I take you to. I thought you were saying in principle, like, um, because of the nature of the beliefs in question, you can come up with, and because of the experience that surrounds them, you can come up with some kind of thoughts about the logical relations of things, and that that will be your argument.
As in you can contrive to form some kind of argument, some like sophisticated or formal argument, right? The conclusion of which serves as the justification. You can do that. It may be the case that you don't want to do that. It may be the case that it's difficult and you can't do it on the spot. But if you're saying like, in principle it is impossible to do that, then I don't know what you mean when you say you're justified. I don't know what you were talking about in the first place. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it seems to me that this goes back to when I said there was like three things being confused. So it seems to me that like there's a difference here between saying that in principle you can come up with auxiliary justifications for beliefs. That is, I can have a belief, it's justified by X, which is not an argument, but I can also think about it for a little bit and come up with Y justification, which is an argument.
Can I
That's to say one thing. Or you could say, hey, if I think about this belief for a minute, the non-inferential justification X can be supplanted by this justification Y that I thought about over here, this argument, right? Whereas supplanting means that like I've done away with the need that I have for the non-inferential
No,
justification.
that's not what I think, right? I'm talking about an issue of resolution. And I'm saying, for instance, I'll work through your analogy. If somebody says to me, I'm justified in believing in God, and I say, why? And they say, look at the sun, right? I take that to mean, look at the sun. God is the creator of the universe. If God is the creator of the universe and the sun's contained within the universe, then God is the creator of the sun, or some kind of necessary relation, or some impossibility of, some contingency argument, whatever, what have you. So when somebody says, like, whether they're appealing to some psychological state, whatever, if they say, I feel justified, it's the case that in principle, there will always be an inference that serves as the actual justifier. And it's just the case that they may not adduce the inference for every um, proclamation of justification. But in principle, they can justify every single one of those claims
Look,
with an inference. That's what I want to say.
can you maybe just state your worry? Because this, look, it might be just
Wait,
over my
wait,
head, but
David. Hold on. Brian, and both. I think Brian and Arianas wanted to say something to that.
I mean, let's just start with, I'm in front of a tree, right? Well, I have a concept of a tree. I'm touching the tree. I have a concept of the bark. I have an experience that's embedded within the concept. The concept entails my experience of this particular tree. I mean, that's all there is to it. And as far as the sun, I don't need to make any sort of logical reason. I can experience, I can look at the sun, I can experience that there is some object there that I am acquainted with, and that object to which I'm acquainted with and has an experience that entails something that I can only describe as beyond me, which I identify as another concept as
Yeah,
God.
but
There's no
entailment
reason.
is
Yeah,
entailment
because that's what
is a
that's
logical relation.
a properly basic belief is one in which it entails its content, right? So that's what it is. That's all we're talking about
This is
here.
good. I'm not gonna lie.
You look, hold on.
Respectfully,
You're trying to stretch a tent that doesn't need to be stretched.
all right. Could Jimmy respond to the analogy though? Because that I just feel like that. I feel like that if I was to respond to half the things you said there, they kind of wouldn't necessarily be addressing the original contention. So
That's a good
that's what my
question.
No, but
point
look,
is. I don't know.
you want to keep
Yeah.
well, you want to keep leaving the grounds of what a non-inferential justification is to say that justification is always going to be inferential in some case, or for every non-inferential
Yeah, but
justification
that's
there is
just going
some
to regress
inferential
back to the
justification.
same issue, though. That's what I'm saying. Like, all right,
But you've
fine, I
never.
get what
I
you
don't
like.
see that
But
you.
why would I say? Why would I say that Why would I
I'll
say
be
that
quick.
that's consistent with with a justification? You're saying you
I'll be
experience a tree. Why? Why is that a justification?
I'll be
I
real
don't
quick.
understand. Like,
Look,
why
the
would that be?
So,
justification is
so I'm
just
just
the
gonna
That's
say,
reason.
a
It's just
question
the
to ask.
reason for it. It's just the reason for it. But it's not an inferential reason. I didn't reason by a process of reasoning. It just explains my knowledge or my belief that I've acquired.
So wait,
yeah. What I'm
you
gonna
take. Hold
say.
on, you
What I'm
wait.
wait,
Sorry,
wait,
Jim.
wait,
Oh, yeah, go on,
wait,
no, go on.
wait. Oh, sorry. Just to get this out of the way, and then if you don't like it, you don't have to respond to it. But just to get my piece out of the way. Uh, what I'm gonna say is, I think most people probably do mean something like a cosmological argument in the background when they say that, but not everyone. And what people who hold to a revelational epistemology like myself are doing when they say, "Look at the sun," or "Hey, read the Bible. That's how you know God exists." What they mean is something like, "Hey, the same way that when I talk to you, you don't say pause, go to your room for 30 minutes, and come up with this really long, sophisticated 50 premise argument about why the sound waves that passed through your ear and suddenly went into your brain prove that a person is there trying to talk to another person named Timothy." Like, no, like it's just immediate to you, like, boom,
Except,
there's a.
except, except if your dog, you know, if your dog,
Wait, what did you say?
That's someone who constructs very like verbose arguments. But yeah, go on.
Oh, I owe that dog, like Jack Angstrike's friend.
his pet, yeah.
Yeah.
Darth
I know who you're
Darth Dawkins,
talking.
who was walking his
Great
dog
reference.
every time he doesn't have an answer. By the way, when you guys are done, I kind of want to know to what extent Alish is a naturalist. But when you guys are done, and I still don't know the worry that Timothy has, is it like a generic worry or problem in
I
epistemology for
think this is.
everybody or for Jimmy
Let me
alone?
ask, because this gets into the conversation Jimmy and I had yesterday. There's 2 points of contention that, to me, I kind of told Jimmy already about this too. One is that if what on the one hand, what is justification? Does it require an inference with that? That still is, it seems to me, yet has been not been resolved in terms of the dispute, which is a different topic from which I mentioned yesterday on the veridicality of the justification. So why, for example, is when I look at a tree, why is that a justification on the one hand? But on the other hand, well, what makes that a vertical justification of truth, being truth oriented or raising the probability of me having that being justified, for example? 2 different points of contention that I think that we're stuck on
I,
from yesterday.
I
But
think
that's
there's some
kind of what
overlap there, though.
I think they're
Like,
related, but they're not the same.
I'm
They're
not.
not reducible to strictly one another. There's a difference between the criteria of justification what makes something justified,
Hmm.
what the concept includes, and why something justified is truth oriented. What
Yeah, but
makes it.
I'm not really in. Okay, well, that seems like that can be contained within the definition in terms of the veridicality. But more to the point, I think I'm not really interested in veridicality in that sense then, because or I believe where the overlap is I'm just interested in if it constitutes a justification at all.
But wait.
So I'm not interested in the true just. That's a true just. Like to say something is a true justification is just to say it's either a justification or it's not a justification. Because presumably to be justified in a belief is just to say that you think it's true. That's just going to be a necessary condition for the belief, let alone the justification. Then to call it a justification, the question arises not what's a good justification, what is a justification at all? Because if I'm just gonna concede that there can be good and bad justifications, I'd probably relegate your view to a bad justification. But I don't even know if it is a justification in the first place.
Yeah, the issue is just going to be that like I'm somewhat indifferent to the different ways philosophers have spelled it out. Like, take your pick. It doesn't, so for me, like as a Christian, like ultimately, I think these are different instances of the overall goal of thinking or having mental states that replicate um, God, that are ways of thinking like God. But I don't think there's any one right way to do that. I think there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that, and it just kind of depends on the context and the particular belief content that you're worried about. You're not going to form beliefs about how hot it is outside, or beliefs about who the 27th president of the United States were, and beliefs about what the root of pi is the same way. You're going to have you're probably going to have three different methods, if not more, for justifying those beliefs. So whatever you want, man. Earlier you put forward like the probability thing. Um, if we run with that definition, that justification has to do with something making a belief probable or whatever, then Nick's point comes into play, where we see that the probability of this belief that God is revealed through the Son, or that I know God because of the Son, or whatever, however you want to put it, right? The basic idea going on behind that is that um, God has so designed the Son that upon experiencing it, that is an occasion for me to be acquainted with God. And it's just not possible for the circumstances to fail to secure that the right kind of experience that involves that belief. It justified, right?
Um, I'll just make this my last contribution because I guess Dutch wants to talk to Billie Eilish. Um, as I
No,
imagine
no,
most men, as
hold
I
up.
imagine most
I am
men.
not in a rush at all.
Not the bad guy.
You guys
Not the
can
bad
talk
guy.
all day. Like, it's like a fun side thing. This is
Yeah,
more
no,
for
but to be honest, I
But
feel like
Timothy, you
we may have
never
reached the turning.
elaborated though. Like a good question that should have been brought up is like, if your epistemic standard relies on like inferential justification, is that epistemic standard itself inferentially justified?
Yeah, but that's what we were talking about like the sort of like some meta justification for justifications or something. And
hold up. I did bring that up,
I'm not
right?
sorry.
With the
Can I say one thing
Methodist.
quickly?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
But I'm just not sure that my epistemic standards in that way are justified. And if you want to make an argument about like whether or not if the
Then
foundation's unjustified is can you even achieve justification at some point in this like justificatory causal sequence? Maybe not. But right now I'm just interested in at the most superficial level, what do people mean when they say non-inferential justification? I've heard it 1,000 times. I don't really. Yesterday was the first time I've ever even inquired. I've heard Jay, wherever he used it, it's been banded about. I never asked before. And then we got into the debate.
but here's
I
the
would just say
problem.
intuition. I would just say intuition.
But here's the problem though, Timothy. You either can justify it or not. If you don't have a justification for it, like Jimmy is just gonna say that you fall victim to the problem of the criterion. But if you do justify it, then obviously if you provide an inferential means for inferentialism, Jimmy is just going to accuse you of
It's
questioning.
circularity, yeah. But
Yeah, he's
that's
going to
fine.
accuse. Wait,
Well,
Yeah, but
hold on though. So you could either justify inferentialism inferentially, in which case you would be begging the question, or non-inferentially, but then you would just be betraying your own epistemic standard.
yeah, but that's just to
So
recapitulate what I
other,
already just conceded moments ago. I'm just saying I'm not taking it to be justified. I'm saying like, and
no,
I
but
actually made mention of this
claim,
early
but
doors.
even if you claim you're not justified, the what they want to say is that you fall victim to this problem of the criterion issue.
No, they don't want to say that. You want to say that because,
I
like I
want to
said,
say that.
it's been. Yeah, I mean, sorry, you two want to say that, but that's
Agree
not
with
what was like. I understand. I understand. Like, if we take this kind of like recursive approach to all the justifications that lead, or the inferences that lead to inferentialism or something, yeah, we're going to find this problem. We've also had this discussion as well. But what I want to focus on now, I'm just, like I said, this will be my last contribution unless there's any questions for me. But in the case of if we were to just throw out now, right, we're just going to completely rule out any kind of inference on uh, the cosmogony, the guy, the not a cosmogony, sorry, the sun, sorry, the guy that points at the sun and says, "I'm justified in believing the sun,
Yeah, can I
God
respond to this?
exists." Yeah, God exists because the sun's outside. How, if you're not going to make a special plea, and don't take that to be like, so let me not say special plea. If you're not going to appeal to the sui generis nature of God here, or the invocation of God or something, in virtue of what is that distinct from the basketball example? If it's going to rely on zero inference, and actually we're going to go so far as to rule out any inference, you actually can't make an inference there.
All right.
Why is it different to the basketball?
The difference is that the sun is
It's not a
consistent.
basketball.
It's not a basketball. The sun gives off. All right. So the sun gives
but
off
but
light.
hey, but
Great.
Buff, respectfully, bro, can Jimmy answer that, and then I'll be done, and then you can ask any question of
Oh,
me.
Yeah,
I
that's
said before, but go ahead.
yeah.
Sorry, bro.
Let Jimmy. Yeah,
Okay, well, so um, let me preface real quick, and I'm not trying to play gotcha tricks or anything. I'm just being honest with you, Timothy. This is why I think Nick was bringing up the veridicality thing, because that's essentially what you're asking, right? You're asking what is it about this belief content or the object of knowledge or whatever it is that ensures the veridicality of um, this thing you're experiencing, this knowledge transaction you say you're going through. And what I said before, and I'll say it again, is that I think it's the object. I think the object of knowledge in this case is also the cause, or we might say that the source of the justification is also the content believed in, and that is just God and His revelation. So it's going to be the properties that we can enumerate about God and the properties that we can enumerate about the basketball that make them readily distinct. It's, it seems to me that the very reason why you're bringing up a basketball, it's a very good analogy, is because it's random, right? Like basketballs just they don't have the right kind of properties that explain why, a basketball somewhere on the globe causes you to know that you're the greatest fisherman in the world. In fact, it seems like there's no causal story you could tell that has anything to do with the things we experience on a daily basis as to how the world works in such a way that the same causes for you being the greatest fisherman in the world are part of the same system of causes that works out the basketball as the thing that makes you know that. But that's not what's going on here with God, right? God is the one who controls all causality. God is in control of the universe. He develops the nature of the human mind. He's set up all of your circumstances that you'll ever be in. He seems like he's in a very special pilot seat where he can make everything work out so that there's no obstacle in the way of knowing that he's the creator behind the sun. Whereas this whole basketball idea, there's just nothing about the basketball that would give it that same power.
Yeah, I'm happy to leave that. I think I understand. Like, I understand your point. I just the only reason I disagree with Nick, because it is the point you're right. The only reason I disagree with Nick is because I think we're just talking about like what is categorized as justification there. I'm not really. I think veridicality is like a condition you're placing on it. I'm saying like in virtue of what is one not a justification, not is one true or false, or likely to be true or likely to be false in terms of basketball and the like where I view to be a non sequitur. I'm just saying like in virtue of what is one not a non-inferential justification and the other a non-inferential justification. I think what you just said is revelation from the Christian God. So I'm satisfied.
Freaking Brian, you didn't get to go on with your thing if you wanted to talk about this in terms of analyticity.
Wait, so Timothy, you're still I don't know if Brian's here, but Timothy, you're still more questioning the definition, not the definition strictly, but what that is, I guess. What your point was. You're still or you're still his still question.
Sorry, yeah. I'm still kind of not confident. I understand, but like I understand now that like really what you mean is that which is contained within the revelation of God doesn't need to be justified. Also, it doesn't need to be inferentially justified. I think that's what you're saying. So that's the criteria by which you discern non-inferential justification, I guess. I'm still a bit confused as to what the justification for that is, but I think I think we've kind of beat it to death. I'm not sure if
I mean, one thing that was brought up about the question making point, if you ask like further inference, but also just running it into an infinite regress, which has kind of been brought up, like that I brought up in the past. Like you can go on forever with inferences, and it's just to say you're not going to get an inference, and you're not going to have any justification at all if you have an infinite, if you run into an infinite regress about it with inferences, because you could just ask for what's the inference for that for forever. So
That's literally what Eilish said, and what I also said before about the problem that the Methodist has with the problem of the criterion. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I don't dispute. I wasn't trying to like get you to resolve the Munchausen trilemma or anything. I was just asking because it seems to me that at least that trilemma is like coherent to me in virtue of the conception of justification that I'm holding to here, namely it being inferential. It seems on the other model, it's not about a whether it falls into some kind of problem of regressiveness, circularity, or whatever. It's that I don't understand what you're talking about when you say that. Are you saying like somebody's in a park making this string of incoherent utterances, and I'm supposed to take each one of those to be a justification in some infinite sequence? Because I wouldn't know if that's what I was doing. I wouldn't be like, oh, this is a clear case of the this is a clear of justificatory infinitism. I wouldn't know what he was saying. If you're saying basketball, fish, fish basketball, I
no,
wouldn't
no.
know what he was
If
talking
you ask for, it's like asking like for further arguments, so we take inferences to be. So we just ask.
right, that's what I'm saying. So in the one hand, I agree, it falls prey to all these problems. 100%, no problem. On the other hand, you're saying, oh, by the way, this is some other category of inference. And I'm saying, oh, guess what? It doesn't fall prey to these problems because I don't understand what's going on. When you're just saying when you're making these utterances, these collections of phonemes, like, why are you saying these things? Why would you say basketball fit? You know what I mean? Why would you say a series of nouns that seem to have
Well, no,
no
no. I
connection
don't
to
think
one
anybody's
another?
saying that. They're saying a series of nouns. Like it's not the
I know
infinite.
I'm obviously being
Yeah.
facetious here, but this is the point I'm trying to make. I'm saying that's what my issue is. I'm not trying to trap you in some kind of, you know what I mean, some kind of Munchausen's trilemma here. Justify
Oh
absolutely
no,
everything.
I get that.
I'm
No,
just saying
I
I
totally
don't
get that.
understand.
No, that's. I don't think that's anybody thought strictly. At least for me, I don't think you were doing that. But
Truth and justification, you got to get clear on what those things are. If they're like normative, if you take truth to be like a normative notion, or like justification to be a normative notion, then you could ask the naturalist, well, even if they're reducible, how does it how is it entailed by naturalism that there would be a reason for me to be in accordance? How is it entailed by naturalism that I ought to be in accordance with some standard, some epistemic standard, or like some theory of truth, right? Even if they're reducible, right? Like that doesn't give me a reason to like abide by any epistemic standard at all, right?
I don't know. If you
That
had
could be
a brother that was like 8 years old, and he were to ask you, "Hey, big bro, do you exist? Do you believe you exist? And if so, in what sense?"
Well, I exist non-normatively and naturally.
Okay, but he would.
You got a very up to speed 8-year-old brother.
He wouldn't say, "I am my brain," so I am just my brain or something like that.
I guess the intuition would be, hey bro, you know, I'm not just a sack of meat, it's just something special about my mind, bro.
Oh,
Respect
hold
that.
up. You talked about special. Like, what about like value? How do you cash that out? Because clearly you believe you're special. I think you're a very special
Well,
debater.
thank you.
But how would you how would you cash that out?
How would I cash out the
Yeah,
value?
like virtue, me, like value. Yeah, value.
Yeah, so I think values are I think values are like mental ascriptions. So like the fact that you find me valuable is just going to be cashed out because you find me desirable, I guess, which is weird. I hope you don't actually find me desirable. That'd be a nightmare.
Uh, I actually think you're probably a fat nerd, to be honest. But your skills as a debater are very impressive. But that could be cashed out that I'm just a layman myself. But look, if Jack is not willing to talk to you or debate you, then that raises my antennas. That makes me want to know more about you. But what was oh yeah, value.
Well, he says
So yeah,
I'm
so I
well,
don't know.
he says I'm a waste of time, but yet he talks to Otangelo. So I guess Otangelo's like I guess Otangelo just ranks higher on the clubhouse debate list than I do to him. So
Yeah, so I don't understand when Jack says, because I've had discussions with him. So he has this Bilgrami view where I, unless I misunderstand him, where he says, "Oh, I can perceive value properties out there in the world, right? But there's no right or wrong way to perceive them." Uh, do you think there is a fact of the matter in the sense that there's something as value like as fact of
I
the
think
matter?
he's confused. I think he doesn't realize that um if you're some sort of like realist about moral properties, you think that they're external. How could the content of that value be relative to agents? Because relativism as I understand it is the denial of external moral properties. It's the denial of mind independent moral properties, right?
I'm not sure if it is like specifically about moral sentence, like a moral declarative sentence, or that state of affairs have moral propositions. I think it's just perceived value properties in general, like a cheesecake, for example, that could also be perceived as having value properties. But I think he had this Kantian view where we cannot go beyond our cognitive faculties and sensory experience, so there's
He's
no right or
confused.
wrong way
Oh,
to
oh,
perceive
okay.
it.
Okay. So here's the problem, and this goes back to epistemology. When you say that there are mind independent moral truths, right? When you say that there's a mind independent moral truth, let's get clear on like what truth means there. Is what truth means there just like a pragmatic notion, like it's the goal of inquiry, right?
No, the
Or
nature of
is truth,
reality, ontology,
or is
right?
truth
Yeah,
like, or is truth something like a correspondent? Like there's a correspondence relation between the agent's beliefs and propositions that are like actual in the world.
yeah.
Like what is it, right? So if you say the pragmatist notion, then like what are you even saying,
That's his
right?
view.
Because
Yeah, I think.
if you're saying like truth is pragmatic, right? I guess you could say, well, there's this predicate of truth, and that applies to like mind independent properties. But given that epistemology alone, I don't see like what's the inference in like saying, hey, look, I think truth is pragmatic, but you know, there are like these like properties that we could ascribe and call them like theory independent or mind independent. It just seems
How
like
could they be mind independent? So this is the issue I have. So I'll try to keep it as short as I can. So from a Christian point of view, we could say, right, so if we make the conditional claim that Christianity is true, right, it therefore follows that God knows all true propositions, right, and he can make that known to us, like facts in the external world, for example, to us, the knowing subject. So then the subject object distinction is solved, and I think you can furnish uh, your whole worldview in terms of ontology and epistemology. It all fits in a neat little box. I think on Christian theism we can do that, but I don't see how you can do that on Jack's view or your view, where you can adjudicate to somebody else.
well, I'm
As a,
not I'm not
go ahead, go
I'm
ahead.
making the claim. Well, I'm not making the claim precisely that there's external value, nor is it non-natural. He is, not
All
me,
right, yeah,
not me. And
and he's
I guess
inconsistent, is what
the
you're saying,
question to
because
ask.
on a view of practicality, there's no fact of the matter. There cannot be no
Yeah, but
adjudication because
I
no.
guess this
Go ahead, go
question
ahead, go
is
ahead.
you because he denies categorical norms. I'm assuming you affirm categorical norms.
Uh,
The question is,
ag-
yeah, the question is then to you, like, how are, first of all, I guess the question is to ask, like, how those norms are non natural, but I don't want to get into that precisely, like, at this moment. But the second question is, like, how are those norms categorical under the Christian perspective? And categorical here just means like unconditional. They're not conditionalized to like a stance of an agent.
look, I'm going to have to think about that, but so for example, in the context of instrumental normativity, right? So there's no objective ought where everybody ought to play chess, but if you decide to play chess, then there are mind independent, objective rules, right? If you want to play chess and not smash. And I think a Christian could, well, I'm not sure if we could flesh out categorical normativity like Kant tried to do with his maxim, right? Because I'm not sure what William Lane Craig says when he wants to ground moral values in God's nature and the odds, like the obligation in his commands. Because if a person just says, "Well, I don't want to be in accord with God's nature," what else can we say? So maybe I just
Well,
believe in hypothetical normativity.
no
Oh,
reason
go
to
ahead.
accept. There's no reason to accept the Kantian thesis because categorical norms aren't constitutive of rationality.
I don't know what that means. Go ahead, Jamie.
I think,
I'm so tired. Go ahead.
yeah, I think you
Yo,
want.
Dutch, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, my
You guys,
guy?
you guys know each other.
Wait, you forgot about me, Dutch.
No, no. How could I forget a perfect school teacher? Of course
You
not.
forgot about
Thank
me.
you.
You forgot about me, Dutch.
Oh,
But you know, the thing is, like, I know Dutch very well, and he knows exactly what you mean, Alice. He's just pretending to be dumb, by the way. You shouldn't let him get off so
look,
easy.
I'm just gathering information for Jimmy to go in for the kill after me. That's pretty obvious, right?
Oh my gosh, you're such a peanut thrower. Yeah, no,
Look,
but that
Dutch, you can't run to hypernorms because under if you want to hold to Craig's view, um, what Craig takes the good to be. So Craig holds to some kind of a virtue ethics where he holds that
Yeah,
the
true.
virtues. Well, this is Craig's view, right? Craig holds to like virtue ethicism, and he holds that the virtues like courage, justice,
Yes.
um, love, and so on are good because they're properties of God.
Yeah,
They're
and these
only
makes me
good
great. Yes, yes.
because they're properties of God. And so if you share in these traits, you're good because these are traits of God. That's your view.
Yeah.
So you can't
Well,
appeal to hypothetical norms
mm,
because because let's say that like I just desire to like rape people or something, right?
no,
Uh,
look, you're
and there
confused, Venus, as usual, right? So the thing is here, like, if I want to be a moral person, I have to be in accord with God's nature. Just like if I want to play
Yeah, but
chess,
you
I have
said,
to.
sorry, I don't think I'm confused. Unless I misheard you, but didn't you just say that then you just appeal to hypothetical norms? Did I
So in my
or did I misunderstand you?
maybe before you got in, so I fleshed out instrumental normativity, and I gave the example of the institution of chess. I could also, for example, like that Muppet, that clown, what's his name, Sam Harris, with his moral landscape, where human flourishing
No, but we're
is
not.
the standard.
Hold on. Are you
Go ahead, go ahead.
sorry? Are you affirming Craig's view? Or are you not affirming Craig's view?
Craft Adams' view,
I
yeah.
don't think he was
No,
affirming Craig's
it's
view.
divine flourishing that matters.
Look, if you affirm Craig's view, what Sam Harris says, instrumental norms, hypothetical norms, all of that stuff becomes irrelevant.
So okay, so go ahead.
I don't think it's a coherent notion. But like the Dutch, you don't need to even. The conversation doesn't have to revolve around the concept of categorical normativity. You can just say that you want certain norms to be universal, and
Like Kant's maxim, right?
well, Kant's Kant's imperative is supposed to be categorical, right? So Arianus is correct that like the part of the goal, part of Kant's enterprise is to come up with a deontological principle that's not conditioned on your values, your beliefs, nothing about you is really
Right.
relevant to considering what it is. But you don't. But I don't think. But I think he's right. Right. A Christian doesn't really want to say that. A Christian wants to say, no, wait a second. Like the way God comes up with rules is very oriented toward the human condition and has something to do with things like human flourishing and human nature and all that stuff. So I think instead you're going to want to say that it's a universal norm, or that you might want to say that it's an intrinsic norm, that it's a norm where you don't have to. The question why, um, what reason do you have to follow it is actually answered by the norm itself. The regress terminates in the norm.
Oh, so that's what Craig meant when he said, so there's like a metaphysical stopping point, God's nature, and a epistemological stopping point. That's his command. But he wants to say it's virtuous, circular. Like, I don't understand what he means by that. So he wants to ground the odd stuff, like the obligations, in God's command. Are you saying, in terms of the termination of the regress, that's where it stops for the Christian?
I'm making a hypothetical statement. I'm saying you don't
Uh,
need to borrow the concept of categorical normativity because I don't think you're really trying to play the same game that Kant is playing.
Look,
You're
how
not
Yeah,
can
trying to.
look? Okay, Jimmy, why can I not just say, well, uh, if God is morally perfect, and I'm not even arguing for that he's maximally great or the highest conceivable being, but if God is morally perfect, he's by definition praiseworthy, and I want to be in accord with his nature, right? So then I have a mind-independent frame of reference for what it means to be a good person or good acts, right? What's wrong with that?
I'm a little confused. So can you say it again?
So what if I just reject or dismiss the whole notion of categorical normativity, and I just say I believe God is morally perfect. I want to be so therefore he is praiseworthy, and I want to be in accord with his nature, right? Just like if I want to play chess, I objectively have to be in accord with the rules of
but
chess.
how can he be morally perfect independent of categoricity?
Uh, as in that he has to be the highest conceivable being or maximally great. What do you mean?
But what does that mean?
So I think if he's morally perfect, the fact that he is praiseworthy naturally uh, follows from
No,
that.
but look, when you say he's morally perfect, do you mean anything other than that he doesn't do anything wrong?
Now, look, I'm just saying, so if we're talking about morality, right, or specifically benevolence, I think the Christian or Craig at least wants to cash it out where he just lists a bunch of virtues. Then he says, unlike Platonic forms, virtues are intrinsic to persons. Right. So God is benevolent.
Okay, so you
That's
want to hold
morally
to Craig's,
perfect.
yeah, okay, fine. You want to hold to Craig's view now. Arianas, what critique were you trying to raise of him? Just so just so I don't like bring anything new up.
It's kind of sneaky how he flipped the switch. I was interrogating him,
Oh,
and now
that,
I'm the one being interrogated. Very nice move. Go ahead.
yeah. No, I was just like asking him because I wasn't even like aware of like before he said all the Craig stuff. I wasn't even like aware he held to that view. So I just
Yeah,
asked
he's a
him,
virtue ethicist and he grounds the
how did he
virtues in
get?
God.
Yeah, I was just like asking how he got to categorical norms from his Christian view. It's just everything.
Just God's laws apply to everybody, but
But
the problem
You're
that
not.
I have at this
it's
point.
No,
not
but now
Go
you're
ahead, James. Go ahead.
rejecting. Hold on. But now you're rejecting that they apply to everybody.
No, hold on. So the Dutch. That's why I made the comment I did that it's not. It's not the whole categorical hypothetical distinction is playing off of certain pre-commitments that are Kantian that you don't have. You're not talking. At least you're not necessarily talking about a norm that is not conditioned on some fact about human beings or some fact about moral agents or whatever. You're simply talking about a norm that's universal. That's it. You're just saying it's universal and it's intrinsic. So when you ask questions like, why should I follow this norm? The norm is the reason why you should follow that norm.
Matt Slick is asking why your name is A Satan.
Wait, but like I think this is like changing the debate. Look, Dutch now holds the view that of virtue ethics and of Craig's view that like the virtues are moral in virtue of God having those virtues. Now, what was the critique you were trying to raise? Just so I don't
How do we get to
introduce something
metaphysics
new.
from his claiming how to manipulate? I don't get it. But I'm rolling with
Yeah,
it.
like how
It's all
he
good.
gets to the thing that I was raising earlier is how he gets to categoricity from that like view alone of virtue ethics, and I guess he cleared it up afterwards by like positing universalism, but not holding to like I don't know mind independent moral truths.
Right, so assume Dutch David, you want to say something like this, right? There's no categoricity, but like the good is what's identical with God or with the properties of
I
God,
don't want to
and
say, look, if I'm going to say that, look, full stop, like good is God, then it's a tautology and it's vacuous, right? I want to
no,
push,
no, 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 no. You're
uh,
not saying that because you don't hold to divine simplicity, right?
right.
Right. So here's what you want to say, right? Since you're going to be a neoclassicalist, right, Craig? Like Craig, here's what you want to say. You want to say that like the good is what is good like. The good is not identical to God, but the good is identical to the godlike. Um, and because justice, peace, love,
Yeah,
courage, and all
those
of these
virtues,
things
yeah.
are properties of God, that in virtue of those being properties of God, they're gonna be good properties. And so if like an agent has these properties, they're gonna be good in virtue of these
But aren't you,
properties. That's gonna be your
isn't there
position.
like equivocation between like a generic sense, like a primitive, irreducible sense of the word good that you can just apply to
No,
anything like a
good is gonna be irreducible.
morally good?
Yeah, that's gonna be
Oh,
It's not
irreducible.
okay,
reducing
okay.
moral good.
That's gonna be a primitive irreducible. But what you're saying is that
Oh yeah, I see now.
when you for example say Saint Venus is good, you're just saying that like it's because he's courageous or he's loving or he's um, just or he's fair or something like that. That's why he's good. And the reason why you hold the virtues to be good is because God holds to the virtues.
Okay, no, look, it's kind of like Alston. So Kuhn had some objections there, and I think Alston said those are good because God has them, right? And then you can flesh out the thisness by listing those virtues. But I think you guys are talking about like this generic, irreducible sense of good that I could also just apply to anything that I want to affirm. Like, oh, that's a good move in chess, right? So if I want to be a good chess player and beat my opponent, then it is a good move in chess. But it's not a moral statement. I want to flesh out God's goodness strictly in benevolence, right? So in virtues and not in a generic, irreducible sense.
So repeat that one more time, please.
So I'm not talking about a generic, irreducible meaning of the good that you can apply to anything. Also, non-moral things like a good move in chess. I'm specifically talking about moral perfection or moral goodness. So that's why I mentioned benevolence, and I want to flesh it out in virtues.
Right, that's fine. But like, look, the point is like I have like two problem. Like I have a number of like arguments to run against your views. I'm just trying to like pin you down to like a view before I start running the critiques.
Super quick. Since when are you guys friends? Because I think at
Who?
least he was like waving the flag of victory like over you and Jack in his videos and comments. Are you guys buddies now
Over
again?
me? Over me?
Yeah.
Wait, over
Look, I was
me?
trying. That was a distraction. Go ahead. I don't want to seem like I'm running away from
No,
questions. Go ahead.
just to be clear, he dislikes Jack. He doesn't dislike me, but like,
He
um,
literally has videos like I wrecked Venus.
yeah, that's just him being silly.
Oh, okay. See, this is what I would do, and then say, "Oh, my doorbell rang," and then I move out the room. But I'm not gonna be that guy. Go ahead with your questions.
No, not like Arianas. He's just like a goofball at times. But like the point that is like, look, the heretofore dilemma still applies to your view. There's no difference between saying like the morals become arbitrary and the morals are just like godlike. Because that just means like in a possible world in which God doesn't
Arbitrary.
exist.
Hold up. Stop. Arbitrary. What do you mean?
Oh, arbitrary just means like just like they're just gonna be the desire of one agent. Just they're just gonna be the traits of an agent. And
No,
God
no,
is
no.
like
So
any other agent. There's nothing
if they
special
mean
about
God's
God.
nature, right, and God is eternal or a
Yeah,
necessary
why is
being.
eternal special? Why does that make him special?
So if God, so if God is a necessary being and He's the highest
What's the
conceivable
argument
being,
that is necessary? What's the argument
hold
that
up,
is
hold up.
necessary?
Look, this is just a definition of Christian theism, right? So
No, but
if I
what's
were to say
you can't put the necessary in the you
I can
can't
do
put necessary.
whatever I want,
No, 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 no,
how
no, no,
about
no,
that?
because no. What's the definition? What's a definition? A definition is the
Look,
necessary and jointly sufficient condition for something, but you can't put existence in as a condition. I can't say that like the chair I'm sitting on is a necessary chair. You
look,
can't define
son,
things. You can't define things into existence. You can't
we believe
define
God.
things into
Look,
existence.
if
Dutch,
hold
Dutch,
up, if
Dutch,
God,
Dutch, Dutch, Dutch,
go
Dutch,
ahead, go
Dutch.
ahead.
Can you tell me what the necessary and sufficient conditions for a definition are?
Yeah, it's a definition just means the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions.
Yeah, that's just to repeat the claim. So we didn't hear the necessary and sufficient
No,
conditions
but
for a
that's the
definition.
synonymy of the claim.
Look, I'm just talking about the concept or the
No, but I gave
position
you the
that
I
we're
didn't give you
defending.
I didn't give you the definition. I gave you the synonymy of the claim.
I'm asking for the necessary and sufficient conditions for a definition.
Yeah. Yeah, so the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions for a definition is to provide the necessary and jointly sufficient condition of the thing that's going to be defined. So in other words, to put it, the definition of a definendum. So here's the definition of a definition. A definition is a definance, and the definance are the definance are the jointly sufficient are the jointly necessary and sufficient conditions for a definendum. And there you have like
What
a
the hell are you talking about?
non-circular. There you have a non-circular definition of definition. Now go ahead. What was your point?
Yeah, so it's quite circular because, of course, the way to understand what
Wait. To say it's
definition.
circular
But,
is to say that the definendum was in the
do
definance.
you
The,
understand? Do you understand how a conversation works?
no,
To
but
have a
hold on.
conversation, you're gonna have to
Oh,
listen,
okay, go
wait for a
ahead.
person to finish their. Yeah, so you gotta
Hmm.
wait for someone to finish. All right. So the reason it's circular, it's quite apparent that it's circular, is you've just pushed back a word that is synonymous with definition. Namely, you've stretched or divided the concept of the act of defining something, which is what we're asking about. We're asking what it means to define something. What is a definition? What does it mean to define something? Into
Right.
the
So
following words, definites and definandum. Yeah, well, that's
yeah,
what we're
what's
asking about in the first place. What are the
well, no,
what are the
that's not
necessary
true.
and sufficient conditions?
What's sorry? What's the difference
Yeah.
between a definite? Sorry, let me walk you through this because you didn't track it. What's the difference between a definite and a definandum?
One is the thing to be defined, the other is the defining of it.
Thank you. And which is which?
Oh, I think the definandum is the thing
Okay,
that's
that's
defining, if I'm not mistaken.
no, it's the opposite. Definandum is the thing to be defined. Definite is the thing defining. Now let me ask you a
But
question. What is a
why
circle
was that
definite?
relevant?
What is?
So why was that difference
I'll tell
relevant?
you what. I'm getting you there, buddy.
I'm
I say it,
getting.
and I'm getting you there. 1 second. Now, what is a circular definition?
No, I'd like to hear why the difference was relevant.
Because I'll tell you why. Because a circular definition is one in which the definandum is in the definance. That's why I wanted you to appreciate the distinction.
That's right.
So you can only accuse me of circularity if the definandum is in the definance. That's why I asked you to make the distinction clear, because I want you to be on the same level as me and have the same clarity as me.
I'd have to step
I
down
wasn't
quite a
I
bit
wasn't
for
I
that.
wasn't I wasn't quizzing you to like flex my muscles or something. The reason I asked you that question was because I wanted you to be primed to have the clarity that I have so we can run through this. Now
But
we
your
agree.
description was less clear than mine, so I don't understand why we
No,
wasted
no,
time.
No.
look, it wasn't less clear. Look, a circle it's only gonna be circular if the definandum is in the definance. Do we agree with that or not?
That is true. That's accurate.
Right.
Which is
Now
exactly what I said, right?
a
What I said was if
definition
the
now
word,
the
if
definition
the
of
concept
definition.
of the
Okay,
word
so
appears in the very definition, then you haven't defined it, right? You're just using synonyms for the same thing we're asking about, which is
right,
just
that's
to
just right. This is appealing to a normative principle. I agree. Right now, here's the definition of definition. Right, the definition of a definition is the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. Now, how is the
for
definandum in
what?
the definance there?
For what? Jointly necessary sufficient conditions for what?
The definition. Okay, so here's what definition is. What definition is the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions of something. So the definition of X is the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions of X. Now, how is the definandum in the definance there?
Okay, so when Dutch earlier spoke of a
I'm just
definition,
that wasn't my question. Sorry, what Dutch said and what Dutch had a war or what Dutch did yesterday is irrelevant. I asked you specific questions. How is the definandum in the definance there? Because your critique was it was circular. And that's what
no,
I'm gonna
that's not
torture you on now. And if you say no, well, 1 second. Didn't you say it was circular? Sorry,
okay.
Elish,
You're about to be
didn't
kicked
you
to
just
the
say it was
audience.
circular like
Do
five
you want
minutes
to be
ago?
a part of the audience, or do you want to speak with us?
I think so. I mean, I went to do some.
Oh, it seems like somebody's walking back on his claim now. What's going on here? Hmm.
I
Wasn't his claim it was circular? Wasn't his claim it was circular?
I went to
Okay,
go
so
do
you're
something, and Venus asked me, "What the fuck is going on?" We went from like meta ethics to this.
he seems
But
to have a
that
hard
was
time
into
staying
wait,
on topic.
but Jimmy, to be fair, give him one more chance because I think he might be charitable. He's just like being kind of a retard right now. But if you give him one more chance, he'll be more charitable. Go
Bro,
on.
this is the second chance I've given him, man. That he's got quite a credibility
No.
problem.
He's
But
entertaining.
look,
He's
here's
entertaining. So I mean,
yeah, but okay, I respect that. I respect that. And I think you're right. He is entertaining. But I don't think it's a good idea to give people attention just because they're entertaining. I think that's actually kind of
No,
a
but
problem.
he's challenging you in a way that you want to be challenged, but then you knock the person
Not
down.
really.
Like I don't
I think
understand.
he's
let's
wasting our
have
time.
a back and forth. Honestly, I want to see this back and forth because I haven't seen you two interact. So, like, just a charitable back and forth. Why not? Why not?
I tried,
I
man.
mean, just give it
I
another
gave him a
shot,
chance.
man. That's all we're
Didn't
saying.
go through. Nah, it's good. It's good, bro. But here's what I'll say, right? So my point of view is just that what Dutch was trying to say is here's how I'm using the word God, right? He's setting forth how he uses the word. Then using language about how we use words, definitions, which has nothing to do with metaphysical questions about what the necessary and sufficient conditions are for something like whether something obtains or something like that. Venus asked what his why he's thinking he can define something into
Wait a
existence.
second.
Well,
Wait a second. So just bring them
Dutch
back up.
wasn't. Hold
Bring them
on.
back up.
No, Dutch wasn't making a metaphysical claim about whether or not God exists. Dutch was just saying, like, look, here's my concept of God, and it includes this, that, and the other. This is how I'm using the word God, and it includes this, that, or the other. It has these certain entailments. So it's just a completely off-topic question to ask what the necessary and sufficient conditions are. And it's hard to understand how it's not deceptive, given that normally when you ask for a definition, you're asking how a word's being used, not what the metaphysical conditions for it are.
You want to have the metaethical discussion with him at least? Or set off the table? I mean, it's fine. You don't say it's your room.
After this, by the way, you said a theist could solve the problem with criterion. Were you like, was that tongue in cheek, or what do you mean by that, Eilish?
What do I mean by what? Repeat it, sorry?
No, so I said, do you have a solution for the problem of the criterion way up in chat? And you said,
Go
oh,
back to
yeah.
this again.
Oh, yeah.
I see it, Scan.
That's you're obsessed with the problem criterion.
Look, it's a big problem, and everything in epistemology keeps coming back to this. That's what I'm saying.
I
I
think
wanted to know if he was just
I think we
trolling or not.
I think we covered that like an hour ago, and painfully with Timothy. I mean,
So,
didn't
but
we?
you're not a Christian, right? So how would you solve the problem with the criterion?
But I am a Christian. I'm a Christian naturalist.
Shut up. Like a bandwagon, right?
There's a lot of Christian physicalists. They're not. It's not very popular, but there are a lot of them.
It's heretical.
No, I don't think it's heretical. It's just I don't think it's a good view, but I don't see why. You think about it, Dutch. A Christian physicalist would just be somebody who thinks that uh, there's some physical way of cashing out the stuff that's being ascribed to humans in the Bible. But that doesn't mean that it's not true.
Hey, what's up, guys?
You.
I came up to say what's up to Darth Arrhenius, man. It's been forever. Where have you been? Clubhouse is in need of you.
He's blocking
Yeah,
everybody.
I was in Morocco and I met a lot of well, I don't want to say that, but I saw nice chicks over there in Casablanca, and yeah, and I'm back here on Clubhouse to dunk on you, Rashad.
Nice, nice. So welcome back, man. It's been a slow it's been a dud since you've been out, man. You gotta come shape up the atheists again. I don't know if you were here when Tom Rabbit was doing those rooms. Same old nonsense since then. So we missed the good old days of actual dialogue.
Whoa, you got your own groupie. That's awesome.
Yeah,
He's one of the people who, even though there were other atheists that were wrong, he wasn't shy to tell them, "Hey, you're being an idiot." And when that starts to fade, we just end up with a bunch of rooms of atheists sort of scratching each other's back and telling each other how smart they
That's a good
are
point.
while
Yeah,
they're
that's a
running
good point.
the silliest arguments you've heard. And
Dutch. Wait, hold on.
I just wanted to ask Rishad or A if they can give an explanation to why the definition of a definition that Saint provided was circular. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah. Frickin' Jimmy. You here?
Yeah, is he asking me?
You or
I thought he
Rashad,
asked
because you
Rashad.
both said it was circular. He's asking either one of you.
Oh, yeah, I think that saying that setting forth the necessary and sufficient conditions of a definition is the definition of setting forth the necessary and sufficient conditions of a definition is circular. Yeah.
No, but how it is circular? Where in the definance it's included the definandum?
Okay. One heuristic for knowing whether that's happening, whether your act of whether the content you put forward to define something to be defined is already in the thing to be defined, or vice versa, is just to
No,
see whether you've repeated the original content that was to be clarified. So if you say, for example, my definition of defining is to set forth the necessary and sufficient conditions, and then I ask you, okay, what's the definition of defining? And then you say it's to set forth the necessary and sufficient conditions. That's just to repeat the same content.
well, if you want to say that like bachelors or unmarried men are also such a circularity, then go ahead, that's fine. But the problem here is that like the definance didn't have the definandum, right? This is not
I
how
don't know.
circularity is defined.
I'm a little confused. The definandum was just the content of the definition.
Well, it was all you always have like the content if you want to define the act of defining here. Suppose if it is circular, supposed to include the definandum in the definance, which it wasn't.
So maybe we can
Define
get these
define
right.
bachelor. Well, it is unmarried man. Well, but you need to define an unmarried man as
Right.
an unmarried man. In this case, it will be circular. But this is not how circularity is defined. If that's your critique, I'm not entirely sure what is the force of this critique.
I'm
I don't
just
think
so
someone would
what I'm
say.
confused
I don't think
about.
someone would say an unmarried man is an unmarried man. So you're giving kind of a silly example.
Yeah,
Well, in
well,
virtue of what is wait, wait, why
what
is
I'm
it silly?
confused
If
about.
the
Wait,
content of bachelor is
I'll speak real quick. I'll speak for
well, I
myself.
wanted to respond to Rechade, so
Yeah.
that's
So let
fine if
me
you
let
want to
me answer your
respond to
question.
me, but
Let me answer
okay,
your
why?
question.
Okay, go ahead.
So just to clarify it, right?
Hmm?
I don't really have a horse in the race about whether it's problematic to repeat the content. If it's just if it comes down to analyticity or something like that, I don't really care. I'm not saying that that's a problem. The issue is he wanted to get very aggressive with Dutch and pretend that Dutch can't describe how he's using a word just because he hasn't listed the necessary and sufficient conditions
Oh, let me
metaphysically
let me
for what
just stop
he's
you. Let
describing
me
to
just
be
stop
true.
you. Can I just interrupt you? I wasn't in the conversation. I came like probably 2 or 3 minutes ago. I thought the critique was that
So then
what
I said
Saint
I
did.
don't think it makes sense for you to address the point that you weren't here to listen to, right, Rody?
Well, there was one point that I wanted for
Right. The
people to
point that
address
But
you weren't here
because
to
Saint.
listen to, you can't address
Can I
that
it's
please
because you
very
weren't
finish,
simple.
or
here
do
for
you
that.
want me to interrupt you again? Thank
I'm
you.
saying if you weren't
So
here to address the point, then what point are you bringing up? Some other point
Let
that
him.
you
Let
think
Rody.
there was a
Guys,
specific
let
point that
Rody
was
talk.
irrelevant to the entire context, right? That what Saint provided was circular, which it wasn't, right?
Look, I have a better idea, right?
Irrelevant to the
Let
context of
this
what was
go ahead.
before.
Just Rody, go. Just say what you have to say. Just go ahead. I
I'm
said,
sorry,
just go
Nick.
ahead and say what you have to say. Just go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I already said what I had to say. Now they are saying that I should have heard the entire context to understand something, but that I think is
Look,
totally irrelevant because
I have a
that
better
very specific.
suggestion here, right? So What if we
Huh?
move Venus up, right? Under the condition that if we actually or strolling, interrupting, we're just gonna block him, and that's going to be the end of his story. How about we give him, because he was there for the whole context. If he behaves himself, 'cause I've known him for a few years, I think he will behave himself, and otherwise we're just gonna block his butt. So how about that?
It kind of
No,
just depends on how drunk he is.
well, you do whatever you want with Saint. I'm not like.
I think there's a good inference to be drawn as to like how drunk he is at this time of
That's
day.
very
So,
true.
uh, but not one to judge.
Okay, I see. So, according to the definition of circularity, where the definance, sorry, yeah, the definandum is in the definance, that wasn't circular. But there was another circularity that you appealed to, which is the same content, right? But in this case, all definitions will be circular, right? Because the
Exactly.
content of bachelor is
Exactly.
unmarried man. But no, wait. So when you asked him to define, or I don't know what like happened there with the definition of the definition, I didn't. Was your critique is that the content is that which you define,
No,
right? Like the
no. Listen,
definition.
listen. The,
Okay, so I just don't
the,
understand what was
the,
the critique.
the criticism is this. If you're going to say someone cannot define something into existence, as
Uh
if
huh.
telling you what they mean by a term or a phrase or something is illegitimate, then I can apply that same standard to you, call it circularity or repeating the content or whatever silly explanation you give for, oh, you can't define God into existence, which was not what Dutch was doing. Then I can just say the same thing about your definition of definitions. Sorry, you can't define into existence this idea of definitions, right? But
No one
oh,
defined
actually,
anything to
or just
existence.
well, I agree. Dutch didn't either. That's why this whole
No, no.
that's why this
Oh my
whole
God, Satan.
criterion
He's.
that
Oh my
Venus
God,
is using
Satan.
is preposterous.
Look, that's fine, but then you should critique him saying that he actually didn't define God into existence, rather than giving the silly
I did.
argument that, oh, you gave the content of definition into the definition.
But yeah, so what I did both. What I said was you're not following your own standard because you are just repeating synonyms like you're saying Dutch is doing. And
Well,
two,
it depends.
Dutch
What do you take
wasn't trying.
synonyms to be?
Rody, Rody, Rody.
Sorry, maybe. Sorry.
So it's cool. It's
Go
cool.
ahead.
But I also said exactly what you just did, which was, look, you're just confusing the difference between defining a term, which is to describe how you're using a word, has nothing to do with these metaphysical questions about what has to come true in order for that to be a description of reality or some concern like that. And that latter metaphysical concern.
Uh, I'm sorry. Like, to be frank, I didn't follow what you said right now.
No,
My critique was another one, right? Which was that if you're saying that Dutch didn't define God into existence or something like that, you should like clarify and explicate that, right? Instead of giving some type of a parody that I don't think was successful.
that's fine. I think it was successful, and you don't. I don't really care to convince you.
That's
I think
fine.
it's a waste of time.
Okay.
I want to know how this diverged into the whole. Can someone give me a walkthrough? Because I went to go do something and like around my house, and then I just heard it to like devolving into shouting about definitions. How did this arise exactly?
So yeah, so Venus was trying to investigate the degree to which Dutch agrees with William Lane Craig, which I don't know, to be honest, how much Dutch is super familiar and can articulate Craig's view. I think Dutch has like a vague classical theist understanding of ethics, and that's maybe about it.
Yeah,
But
fine.
when yeah, Venus asked a question, something about God having some attribute or property, or I think it was ethical in nature. Dutch went to say that God is eternal, and Venus asked why that makes God special. And here I think he meant something like, why does that give God something like a normative status or moral authority or anything like that? Something like that was my takeaway. And Dutch, when he went to respond to that, he didn't even get through his detailing of God's necessity, which is where he was going. Venus was already interrupting him. It was like, well, you haven't established that God is necessary. You need to argue. Where was your argument that God is necessary? So that is the flip
That
part of it.
justifiable,
And
that is just justifiable interruptions, because if you are like going off this type of a premise without your interlocutor even agreeing to that premise, or this premise is contentious, obviously it's like not problematic to cut you off before you're continuing.
yeah, so I disagree on several levels. First, I think it's just in general rude to move the topic away from. I mean, I've been sitting here for hours now listening to Arianas because Dutch has been asking questions, and I haven't rudely turned the conversation away from their topic. Second, I think it's rude to interrupt other people and get super aggressive with them when they've been polite with you. First of all, I just think it's rude in general, but it's especially rude when it's someone nice like Dutch. The fact that you do that then paints the rest of what you have to say. So it characterizes the critique as, okay, this person has motivation. They have an axe to grind here. On top of that, so third point, it was just off topic. If you ask me, what's the model of evolutionary biology that you hold to, and I begin to go through the details of what my thesis is on, some my idea about common ancestry and this, that, and the other, and then you interrupt me before I can even get to my explanation of what I believe, and you say, well, I don't see any reason to believe that. It just demonstrates that you're not actually listening to understand the position of your opponent. You're just interested in disagreeing with them at any chance that they have. You're not interested in hearing them out and seeing if they have something to offer the conversation. So at every level that there could be an indication of dishonesty and insincerity, there is one. And I just have no interest in that. It's a waste of time.
Well, I'm not going to defend Venus as being like a polite debater,
His
right?
opponent,
I think like
he's just trying to pwn all the time.
no, look, I have no problem saying like Venus is rude and like disruptive, or well, I'm not entirely sure about disruptive, but he's rude and
Uh,
aggressive, right? And that's like
I
something that you might want to negate in your like dialectics, right? But the specific point that you want to, and that's
okay,
like, it's
the,
just like the meta. One second. It's just like the meta to talk about it right now, but I think it is important that if you are going off a premise that your interlocutor is not really agreeing to, it is all of the other stuff will be totally waste of time if you are not addressing that, right? And this is just like how how you want to do, like how you want to have an efficient conversation.
Yeah, I greatly
I'm
disagree.
I'm not
So
disagreeing with you that Venus is rude and aggressive. That's not my point.
and you see that's why my style is superior. I mean, everyone agrees with that.
Inshallah, Elish, inshallah.
He like starts off like just like over talking and
No, but sometimes the over
snipe,
talking is,
snipe
I
that
think,
kid, snipe that kid, snipe that kid.
okay, I see.
It's like
This
Moroccan,
was he
like
was very
Moroccan.
charitable.
Have you,
That's fair.
have you guys seen the movie Moroccan Sniper? Like he stars in it. He's like the protagonist of Moroccan Sniper.
By the way, Arianas, you know that when you came to the other rooms, the non-philosophical oriented rooms, everyone thought that you were a trans woman?
That's hilarious.
That's super hilarious. Well, you have like a little bit of a gauge voice, and you have like
What?
women in your profile picture, so.
I think. Oh, I
What?
think you know exactly.
Stop
You
it.
know
Stop it.
exactly what my voice sounds like.
Like a gay voice, what do you want?
It's not gay. How's it gay?
oh,
Are you
Brody,
trying to wait, wait,
Brody.
wait? Is he
Wait.
trying to make friends? I think he's. You see, this is like the move these like anti-realists want to make all the time. Let's assume my voice is like gay. and what you mean by gay is queer.
Do you really
How does
want
it
to
follow,
argue that?
how does it follow from that my voice doesn't exist?
Okay.
Boom,
Sorry, what did you
boom,
want to say?
boom, boom, roasted.
Okay. Hey, you wanted to say something important.
Hey, just because I'm talking to you doesn't mean it's important. Come now. Come now.
Oh, no. It's more important than what Elish said this way.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I needed to clarify that.
I don't know about that either. I was just gonna ask you if you're. So I can't remember. Are you from Israel? Because I see the Israeli
Yeah, I'm from Israel.
flag. Okay, cool.
Born, live,
That's really good.
serve,
I don't know if that's.
and live.
He was a part of the Jerusalem conference when Trump, declared Jerusalem as the capital. You were there, right, Rody?
Yeah, mashallah, yeah.
How did Trump's hand feel? I'm assuming it's like squirmy.
Smooth and a little bit slimy. By the way, why did you ask that, Satan? Just out of curiosity?
Oh yeah, well. I have no. So I have the only reason I haven't asked Arianis, for example, is I can't see that flag for one thing, and on the other hand, like I have no idea what flag that is. Like I don't even have a guess what flag that is. I can't.
Portugal, right?
Is it Portugal?
Yeah, it's Portugal.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's in love with Ronaldo.
Yeah, my boy is gonna win it all this year.
I'm in love with the coco.
What?
By the way, what was the conversation about Dutch before I came?
Okay, long story short, I was Timothy was generating gibberish about epistemology. Then that was done. I I wanted to talk to Eilish because I'm fascinated with him as a character and debater. I was asking what type of naturalism does he adhere to. He I
What
still
type of
don't
what?
understand his view fully, but at some point we were talking about metaethics, and then Venus came in, and he did what he did. So
Yeah,
Lennox, do you want to
so
bet that Venus was a little bit drunk?
well,
right.
I
So
think I
go
wish
ahead. Go ahead.
Venus wasn't drunk so I could have talked to him about the
No.
whole nominalism stuff, but
Okay. Like I
what?
think no, because I found this like consistency that when he's drunk, he's much more aggressive than usual.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I just told you about the Moroccan sniper movie. Like the dude starts off drunk, and then he mellows out at the end once he figures out
Uh,
he can't snipe at Jimmy, who's like an American patriot.
oh yeah, I wasn't listening to that. Okay.
So Eilish, are you an atheist for real?
Well, I mean, I'm an atheist on Thursdays, if that makes sense.
Look, theist, atheist, or agnostic? Go ahead. Which one? Like the proposition no gods exist. Is that your position? If so, can you render an argument?
Well, no, because what Jimmy said earlier in the way he crucified Timothy in the debate, I just had to become a theist afterwards. Like that was atheism on its last legs.
Very good.
Alright. Wait,
Very good.
Jimmy is a Satan?
Well,
I assume.
Jimmy's Satan on Thursdays as well, so I guess.
I like how I did find it funny that Matt's asked. He's like, you shouldn't
who
Was
associate
that
is
the
with
real Metzlik?
who is Satan? What does Satan mean? What's the reference of Satan?
Was
I
that the
want
real
the
Metzlik? I
sense
thought it
and
was
the
the troll
Oh, look,
account.
reference of
Timothy's
Satan.
back.
Wait,
Timothy, bro. I mean, you just missed Venus trying to crucify Jimmy, and Jimmy did the 180 on him. 180, the 360, and the
No
240.
scope.
Look, Nick, because you let. Sorry, by the way, I'm out from the gym, but because you let Haiti on stage earlier, now I'm not going to be able to listen to the replays.
Oh no, I didn't let her up. That was blame Dutch for that. I wasn't gonna let her up. Literally, Dutch let her up.
No, you.
And I was like,
Yeah,
don't. I
No,
was
like
like,
that.
you
kind of
let.
like, don't let her.
No, Dutch, don't say anything. It was Nick because he was terrified. He's terrified of me and Jimmy ganging up on him.
To be fair, it was in the process of waiting for Jimmy to be done with his pooping. So
But she didn't. She shouldn't just. Yeah,
how do you know if he didn't poop or not? That's suspicious, man.
yeah, 'cause he's a woman. That's he.
Jimmy,
He doesn't poop because he's a woman.
that's a weird. Wait, was this theory, or did I say I was pooping?
You said you were. Never mind. This is getting awkward. Never mind.
I do it
Because
on purpose. Freaking.
uh, okay, because you said I made a comment about the joke about Victoria and the ladies and how I'm so cordial, and you said I was pooping, but when I came back, blah blah blah.
Oh yeah. No, oh yeah. Okay, I thought I did. Freaking yeah.
Actually, you can listen to the replays. You'll just have to open a browser, Timothy. But
Actually, Timothy,
Yeah,
before you joined,
yeah,
I was giving
I
your
think,
arguments. Go ahead with the
yeah,
imitation.
yeah, I think Jimmy is running away, and I don't have any more excuses than my vodka bottle that I have to me.
Yeah, Timothy, I was just before you joined, I was just saying how impressed I was with your very eloquent query about your worries about epistemology and how well you articulated yourself. But yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. I felt like there was a punchline coming at the end of that,
yeah, don't
but I
listen.
appreciate it.
Hey, Dutch, lying is a sin. So be careful.
Not if I say it's a joke right afterwards.
Oh, did you say that joke? I didn't hear that.
Look, shut up. We should debate about something. I don't know what.
Well, we were kind of ganging up on your Craig view. So
Look, I still don't honestly look. I'm going to listen to the replay and when I have time and Google the words and stuff. But I still don't know what type of naturalist he is. So I only know about epistemological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism, and I still don't know if he believes if immaterial stuff exists. Right? I still don't understand it, but we can just chalk it up to my ignorance. That's all good. If you guys want to talk about something else, so.
Well, I mean, I think I told you that earlier. I don't take logic to be material. So that would be an example of something immaterial.
Yeah, truth,
David
value,
is David
meaning,
is.
identity. Oh, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
just
the whole, I mean, so I made the distinction clear. Like, if we're talking about physicalism, we're talking exclusively about mental states. If we're talking about materialism, it's like something above and beyond that, right? So the scope of materialism is much broader than physicalism, right? Because physicalism is a thesis about mentality, right? So, for example, you could say that the mind is physical, but still hold to non-physical things, right? Like logic or like what you said, meaning, for example. But that's only because, you could be a physicalist but not a metaphysical naturalist. That's fine.
So
Metaphysical
that makes
nat
sense if you are a nominalist. That kind of makes sense, but I think there might be problems there.
Well,
But you said you were not a
look,
nominalist. So
if all
go ahead, go ahead.
metaphysical naturalists are all metaphysical naturalists are physicalists, right? But well, I mean, I don't want to say that because technically you could be a metaphysical naturalist and be an eliminativist. But a lot of metaphysical naturalists are physicalists. But it's not true the other way around, if that makes sense. You could be a physicalist, and you could posit abstracta like Van Inwagen, and Van Inwagen doesn't take abstracta to be material. And there's just like no contradiction there.
That's is that similar to what Jimmy was saying about how a Christian, at least in theory, could be a materialist, Jimmy?
Yeah, he just
right.
Okay, okay. So I'm
he just
go ahead,
doesn't.
go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not a heretical view. He just doesn't find it plausible given like other ontological commitments he has. But the same is true for like any person who like holds to like a theory. Um, like a metaphysical theory, and then they just like observe like other properties within their ontology and just decide that, yeah, those don't work out, right? The same is true for like me. I think physicalism works out, but I don't think that positing and saying that everything in the world is physical or quantifiable works out, because I don't think it works out for abstracta. I don't think it works out for meaning. So I think that's
Interesting.
oh,
I've
it's
never heard this before. Could you are there some philosophers or some books that hold this position that I can read? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this replay, study it in the coming months, and at some point come back and to destroy you. You understand that, right? So can you give me some more ammunition?
sorry, say that again.
Oh, uh, I was just saying I'm going to listen to the replay
Oh,
and make notes
yeah, that's
and
fine.
study
No, I'll
and study
send you the
stuff and
I'll
yeah,
send
thank you,
you
thank you.
the hold on.
Cool. So that's all I had to ask. Go ahead, guys.
Freaking ditch.
All right, I might be back later, but I'm going to eat now.
Venus,
So God bless everybody, even you, Eilish. Talk to you later, guys. You bye.
See you, bro.
take care. Venus texted me saying Jimmy Angstrike. Oh my god.
I'm gonna have to make that my last name.
Yeah, Angstrike translates to fearful.
It's an analytic relation.
German, if you look up the German to English translation, it Angstrike translates to fearful.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, I'm being
Are
serious.
you? No.
Go to Google Translate. It's hilarious. It'd be interesting to see you guys go at it in the moral error theory stuff, because he's really committed to the queerness the queerness argument.
Who's a fan of it?
Venus.
What in the world?
Yeah, it's like an error theorist. Even strong, even he goes all the way to like say we should like abolish moral talk language. Like even stronger than like a fictionalist. We should abandon moral talk. Well, okay, I get it. Not all moral, not all moral normativity exhausts normativity, guys. Come on. Oh, and the epistemology stuff. Well, now taught saying that I think he is, because he doesn't think that epistemology is normative, right? But he doesn't deny normativity altogether. But there's like a question as to like how that's compatible with like error theory, because of course the moral error theorist can like preserve normativity in epistemology but deny it in ethics. But he doesn't think epistemology is normative,
What
right?
in the world? He's not like an instrumentalist about norms even.
No, he is. I mean, he cashes out in like desired. I had the desired, but be interesting because we were having the conversation about epistemology earlier. I just think I mean, just given what by most people mean by justification, he's going to be an anti-realist about justification. Now he calls himself a relativist, but just think about this parody for a second. Um, Mackie wants to like give a conceptual argument for like why uh moral norms entail categoricity. So basically Mackie just appeals to like the semantics, the semantics of like our convention, and that entails, I think someone scored but whatever. I think that in he Mackie says that entails categoricity. Moral talk entails categoricity. So, in order for moral norms to exist, there has to be categorical norms, right?
Yeah,
Categorical ethical norms. Now, why can't he make the same argument about, unless if there's like no parity? I don't see where the lack of parity is. Why couldn't he just give the same argument for epistemic norms and just say, well, look, given what most people mean by justification entails like some categorical talk regarding epistemic norms, it's just going to follow from like most people's sense of justification that I deny justification, basically. So in
yeah,
the same way, if moral properties existed, he wants to argue that would entail categoricity, but since there is no referent of categorical norms, then moral properties don't exist. By parity of reasoning, you could give the same thing for epistemic norms and just say, look, given the fact that what most people mean by justification would entail categorical norms, since there's no referent of categorical norms, I deny justification.
yeah. That sounds like something like what Cuneo means to argue in his um, what is it called? Not partners in guilt. Something in guilt argument. He argues that like if that um whatever yeah, that's it, companions in guilt. Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like if you were to be consistent or at least like show what the parity is, I mean, he might say some BS like, oh, but I don't take epistemology to be normative, but that's not really the issue though, because you could you could still say, look, there's like this notion of justification, and that notion of justification in most people's minds extends to like some categorical epistemic norm. And since Venus denies those, it's just going to follow that by most people's sense of justification, justification actually doesn't exist, right? And we say the same thing with like how he argues against moral realism. Well, in order for moral realism to be true, there has to be categorical, non natural epistemic norms. There's no reason to warrant admission those properties into our ontology because they're queer. So, given inference to the best explanation, we could just dismiss such properties existing, right? Well, you make the same thing regarding categorical non natural epistemic norms,
Yeah.
you know? Or, sorry, you could run the
Yeah,
parity
he would
argument for categorical epistemic norms.
yeah, he would not only need to be a moral error theorist, but an epistemic error theorist.
Yeah, but he wants to say, oh, those things are conventional. But then you could just pull the move. Okay, so then why not just restrict your anti-realism to just moral relativism then? What is it about one? What is it about one that doesn't make you affirm the other? That's what I'm not understanding. Because
Yeah.
given the method in which he tries to argue for moral error theory, I don't see like how you couldn't just like run the same like move of public semantics for like how most people take justification to be and what that entails. And since what that entails something that doesn't exist, then he's just going to have to deny justification at that point.
Yeah, it seems to me that like this is part of a family of arguments that you can move between moral norms and or even moral values and epistemic norms, epistemic values. What is Oppie call them? Theoretical values or whatever they're called in his terminology.
Virtues.
Theoretical virtues. That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but he takes those things to be like preferential, and I'm assuming like you have like a view of like those things being like mind independent, right?
Yeah. So what I want to say is that they're more than mind, but they're not less than mind. So I don't think. So I think there's a different. I think there's a problem that arises for like moral Platonists in that uh, there's a non-motivated. The norms become unmotivating, or there's no reason to think that they're motivating just because they're normative. So the same problem that we had before. How do I word this? For like a Platonism, it seems like the problem is how to conjoin human motivations and moral norms or norms in general. Because if there isn't some kind of essential unity between those two, if there isn't, if I'm not um, somehow predisposed to operate in terms of those norms, then to even try to reason about them is futile, since that will just be subject to motivations that aren't guided by or oriented towards those norms. So you've got to have some kind of something or other that makes human motivations, human faculties, all that stuff like almost designed for the norms and the norms for human stuff. So I don't want to say that if categoricity includes the idea that there's no condition or qualification about norms whatsoever that has to do with human stances, then I would have to reject that. But I would say that I think there are universal norms and there are intrinsic norms, and intrinsic here just meaning that like the distinction between intrinsic and conditional, right? Like I think what Kant conceived of as hypothetical norms are better construed as conditional norms. It's just the idea that hey, if I have suppose I have some irreducible reason to live, and um, it comes about that in order to live, I have to go to the grocery store. Well, then, because I have this reason to live, I have this reason to go to the grocery store, and that's like the conditionality there. I have all these conditional norms that I can sort of draw out of this more basic duty to live or something like that. And so I believe in something like that, this intrinsic norm, and it being universal for humankind. For me, it would be something like um, the the norm to please God or fear God or something like that. But I don't think that's going to be that very concept is not going to work if there aren't something like human stances that are inherently wired to say yay or nay to that. If that makes any sense.
Right. But you wanna say that unlike people like Venus who do think that there are like universal norms, you just want to say I affirm like universal norms in the sense that they apply to like everyone at every time at every place. But it's not the case that those norms have like some categorical element to them. So they're still conditionalized, right? They're still conditionalized in some sense. It's just that they're not relative, they're like universal.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's intriguing.
I think that and maybe this is my misperception, but even in listening, it has been a long time since I've like read or listened to anything about Kant. But when I did, somehow I picked up the idea that categoricity was um, the exceptionless nature of the norm. But that's not quite enough. It is exactly what you're saying. It is this lack of any um, contingency on things like human stances, human emotions, human motivations, things like that. And that just seems like not, even before you get into philosophy, it does not seem like that's what's being described, morally speaking, in the Bible. So there you go.
But I mean, Jimmy, what you have to remember is that while they're universal for you, they're not going to be universal for me.
Weren't we talking about somebody who? Oh, you were talking about. Weren't you talking about Angstreich and how his
No,
relativism seems to actually?
it's Ethan Muse.
Oh, okay, yeah. That is bizarre, man. I don't get that.
It's bizarre for you, but not for me.
Arianis, why don't you? What's like your big? If you had to list one and only one reason that most convicts you not to be a Christian, what reason is that?
That's a good question. I guess the question is like how in regards to like the epistemic stuff, like how Christianity has like a vast advantage over like atheistic views regarding like the mind and epistemology and stuff. Like how their metaphysical story fares. Um, I know this sounds like very beta, but like how it fares better with like my intuitions than like just like atheistic views, if that makes sense. And by vast advantage, like I mean, of course, that's going to be like relative to like theoretical virtues, but like one consideration would be like, if there's like a strong deductive argument, there's no reason to like go into abductive considerations for Christianity. But if there's like a non-deductive argument, then I see abduction as like being the strongest candidate for like Christian theism. But then if that's true, then there's like a question as to like, what's like gonna be expected under a Christian hypothesis, right? And I just don't see, I mean, at least in terms of predication, I just don't see like any substantive difference, because like any property that you ascribe to God, it just seems like equally applicable to natural states, although, unless if there's like some argument that there's no parity, that would be like enough to convince me.
I see. I see.
But then metaphysics, it, for me, metaphysics is just like basically, you have your story, I have mine, right? Very theory laden in that regard. But like if we disagree about something, it's just gonna be disagreement in like in virtue of the fact that like the properties and stuff that you posit is just like gonna be incompatible with like my background assumptions, and so then we have to investigate what the background assumptions are, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I more or less agree with that. Yeah.
But then,
What do
but
you think?
and then, but there is a way that you could argue for Christian theism. Like Jay and I have been thinking about this. That Well, there's like a way in which you could like run the parity between, you know how people like Jerry Fodor want to say that like semantics and stuff are going to be cashed out in dispositions. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of the Kripke versus Fodor dialectic on semantics?
Not really.
Yeah, so Kripke wants to argue that meaning is normative, and Fodor wants to argue that meaning is non-normative. I guess there's a good parity between that with, if Kripke is true, if what Kripke is saying is true, then what implications does that have for like the theism versus atheism debate? Because a lot of people want to argue, if Kripke is correct, there's no reason to believe that like naturalism or like any other atheistic view, or like strictly atheistic view, can account for like the normativity of meaning, if that makes sense.
Because they're Christian atheists, which you would call like maybe anti-Christ, right? So they're anti-Christian atheists.
You mean like the Tom Rabbit people? No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. So yeah, that's that. I think that's the only way they would agree on terms, if because then that it kind of turns into a theological conversation somewhat, right? And then they don't want to admit that, but then they want to deny the identity of God, but then applying it to their arguments, silly.
But Jimmy, do you understand? Like, if Kripke is correct and meaning is normative, then that normativity is either going to be like non-natural or natural. And given that it couldn't be natural, just you could give like some like open question argument, then normativity would have to be non-natural. And if it's non-natural, then theism is like the preconditions for that.
Yeah, I think that's so.
I mean, of course, you have to
In
deal
a
with Platonism. Of course, there's like a dialectic with like you and the Platonists regarding like how meaning is going to be cashed out, but that's like generally one way to argue for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I would want to. I think right. I think I'm going to differ with you guys in some ways. For example, I think I'm going to want to narrow it down to Christian distinctives, and so rule out other theisms and Platonism with the argument. But yeah, I think in general that's like, depending on how you actually run that in practice, that is a very good way of um, telling a story about how you would give a transcendental critique, how you would say like, look, here's this thing. Um, it's a precondition of the way we live our lives, the way we think, whatever you want to call it, human experience, and uh, we need to know what this thing is. So it's an epistemic precondition, and it just if
It's not
naturalism is
an
true.
epistemic. The thing that's interesting about this argument is just not just merely an epistemic condition, because the way epistemic conditions are going to be analyzed is in virtue of meaning, right? It's primarily a linguistic condition or a linguistic precondition.
Well, yeah, I don't think we're disagreeing with each other. When I say epistemic condition, I just mean like it's impossible to avoid being committed one way or another, whether meaning is normative or dispositional. That's all I mean. Like, it's impossible for me to make choices that aren't motivated in some way that commits me to one of those views. I may even be inconsistent on the matter, but that's all I mean by that. That, like, if we analyze my belief set and my behaviors and all that stuff, we're eventually going to come along beliefs that are like, oh, hey, you're kind of a dispositionalist
Right.
about this,
Do
or
you think that when someone is invoking something and they give a meaning for a term, do you think that it's like implied that if they give the meaning for a term, if um it's something which is able to be communicated, but there's no referent of what they're talking about, then they ought to like revise their sense? Do you think that meaning is normative in that construal?
Yeah, I do.
Well, yeah, then obviously you're past the dispositionalist phase, and then you'll be wanting to say, like under atheism, there's like no account for the meaning of like terms anyway, I guess, or there's like no basis of which you could argue that there's like meaning in the normative sense. But then that's just like an argument that goes further, because of course you could be like a Platonist and think that the normativity is like abstract in some way.
You're talking about, so you're saying that if it's some kind of meaning externalism, or if there's an externalistic uh, norm to meaning or reference or something like that, then it's going to make what you're talking about with the Kripke Fodor debate trivial. That's what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is, like, once you have normativity in mind, then there's a question as to how the normativity of analytic statements are accounted for, right, by these like ontological views, right, like naturalism. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it's like when you ask the question, I have this concept of being unmarried or being a bachelor, and it legitimizes my use of those terms interchangeably. But what is it on naturalism that actually makes that legitimate? Like, why is that not just a misconception?
Yeah. Or you could just ask like the other question, like what does it even mean to say? I guess they could like sidestep it, but I don't think. I mean, a lot of their arguments are like question begging, but you could just ask the question, well, how is meaning accounted for by like just take any analytic proposition, right? Like what's the account that's of what's the normativity there? And if it's normative, how do you know it's like um how do you know, first of all, how do you know it's irreducibly normative, right? Like analytic propositions. And then if analytic propositions are irreducibly normative, how are they like describable in physical terms? Like how do you know that's not just like some non-natural fact, you know?
See, yeah, and that's exactly why earlier I said it's an epistemic precondition, because it's gonna like, as far as defending the theories, it's gonna come down to presenting some kind of reason to think that your naturalist meta narrative accommodates all this talk about how you should use words, or whatever, or how you even are using them legitimately.
Right. But to even come to like the knowledge part, one needs to have at least some notion of like what counts in favor of knowledge. Like I think most people here would agree that they're like a priori justified in believing in mathematical truths. Okay, but in order to like postulate that there is like a priori knowledge and like analytic truths, we first have to like analyze like what accounts for like the analytic, what accounts for like the meaning of like analytic statements. And of course people are just going to say, well, that's just circular, because if it's just analytic, it's going to be true in virtue of the meaning, right? So what I mean by analyticity is such where it's true in virtue of the meaning. Yeah, but what accounts for that? Oh, I mean, it's a hinge or whatever. And so we're back to the epistemic problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why. Well, you're really running what could, depending on how you use this and how far you go and how you bring Christianity into this. Like I would want to take that kind of reasoning and say like, yeah, I think when you actually look at the ramifications that these non-Christian stories have for the universe on language, so on this termination of terms into analyticity, and then you ask the epistemic question like, well, I mean, why are those epistemically positive? Like, why is that? Why? How do you know that you're not living in some crazy Lovecraftian universe where your idea of a bachelor is just as far removed from what marriage is as colors and the number three or something like, you're over here saying a bachelor is an unmarried man, and that's, you live in a universe where that's sort of like saying red is the color of the number three or something like that. That's where I want to go with that, right? It's like, hey, I think you can use that to show like there's Christian distinctives that draw out the Christian worldview as the thing that accounts for that. It's like really coming back to this God character of the Bible and this Jesus of the Gospels.
Yeah, I think the meaning stuff captures like what you're trying to get at with the skeptical issue. Because if it's just like an a posteriori thing, I guess they could just say, "Well, I mean, it's pragmatic. I want to believe it because that serves my goals, and I just want to believe that Clark Kent is Superman because it's the goal of inquiry, bro. Pragmatism.
Yeah.
How else could I have beliefs about this, the reality or the state of affairs? It's instrumental."
I know that for a consistent pragmatist, it's going to be question making. So I'm not proposing it as that kind of reason, but man, it just seems to me like the simplest problem for
But
that
no
kind of point of
pragma.
view is.
Wait. But Jimmy, a lot of pragmatists don't have an issue with begging the question. I mean, just,
Oh
just look
no!
at some individuals so we could note, right, Jay Styles?
Oh no!
I have a question about
Yeah.
normativity, like the phenomenology of normativity. Um, do you understand normativity to be something like both the commitment to some rule that you can either be in or out of accord with? Like it's both the commitment, whatever, however commitment is cashed out, and the rule
Yeah.
itself, not merely the rule, right? Alone.
Yeah. So what Kripke means by that is that there's an accordance relation that the agent can be in or out of accord with um, the sense that they use for particular term and what the referent is, or it's attempted to be picked out by the term. So you could be in or out of accord with that. So in that sense, it's normative.
But like if we were to analyze like what's required for notions of in and out of accord to be sort of sensible, does an idea of being committed to this rule
This
also
is
intrinsic to it? Like it's not merely the rule itself, right? But it's an agent's commitment to it being true or it being
Well,
right. Like
you have a commitment towards it because there's some preservation of truth, right? If you do so, whereas like if you don't, then obviously you're failing to be in line with like what the referent is, if that makes sense. So in that sense, it's there's going to be some prescriptive nature to that.
I gotta run, but that's funny you asked that, Nomad, because that might be that might be a good way to simplify what I was talking about earlier with respect to rejecting categoricity in favor of universality, and that is that like we want, like, say you're talking about say you're a Christian and so like myself, and you're talking about human beings' duty with respect to God, and you want to talk about the normativity of God's law, His commands, whatever it is. And the question can be raised, what reason do we have to follow God's laws? Or it could be questioned like, well, why suppose that I even have the right motivations to which the law is even relevant? Like, why even suppose that my thinking about that or your telling me about it can even um, have the right effect? It's sort of like if you're an animal that doesn't care about these norms in the first place, right? If you're not motivated in accord with them, then no amount of shouting the norms at you is gonna change your mind. And even your own thinking, whatever it is about the norms, is not going to um, be well interpreted in terms of the norms themselves. You just lack. They would just be alien, right? You would lack the very ability to interpret the motivations of this other person who just doesn't care about them. So I think, to your
Yeah.
credit,
Yes.
to your credit, like, yeah, it seems to me like when God is relating to human beings, you need both. There's something about the norm that's intrinsic, so that you don't need something more than God's creative status and His authority for it to constitute an objective reason to do those things. And yet, at the same time, you need to be made in His image. You need to be made and designed in such a way that you have intrinsic commitments to that norm. So it's not even possible for you to not care about it. You just operate in terms of that norm, whether you like it or not. And even your attempts to get away from it, or even your attempts to be out of accord with it, are themselves kind of parasitic on this more basic reliance on the norm, this commitment to it. Yeah, I think you're right.